Chapter 1860. Inside the 9 palaces, Wei Zihong stood upright in the main hall and looked at the map in front of him. It had been a month since he had sent all the Jinren to attack Luozhu Tian. Due to the fact that the map was imbued with a powerful supernatural power, it could not reflect the happenings in this world at any time. However, if that place was attacked, it would be reflected immediately due to the change of karma. Sima Quan and Peng Xiang stood behind him like shadows. They did not participate in the battle and were only responsible for passing on information. If there were any changes in the 2 directions, they would be able to report back in time. However, as the 2 of them were genin demon, there was no difference between them and their real bodies. Therefore, if necessary, they could transfer all their power to the other side at any time. The 2 of them were originally silent. However, at this moment, Peng Xiang suddenly raised his head and said, "True God Wei, there are countless gods and monsters rushing towards me. Based on the current situation, they will reach me in 1 or 2 days." Oh. Wei Zihong didn't seem to be surprised at all. He raised his head, the divine eye on his forehead suddenly opened and looked out. As expected, he saw countless gods and monsters appearing in the distant sky, but he didn't see any blood descendants of the gods and monsters yet. However, he was sure that someone was behind this. He ordered a disciple, "Quickly go and check on the realms that we have conquered." The disciple obeyed and left. After a while, he returned and said, "Reporting to True God Wei, the realms are also being invaded by gods and monsters. There seems to be more than usual, but it is not serious. Therefore, I did not report it." Wei Zihong snorted and said, "It seems that the other side is not completely unprepared." Previously, when they were planning to attack Luozhu Tian, the movements were very big and they did not want to hide it completely. Moreover, he also thought that while he was planning to attack Luozhu Tian, the other side might also be thinking about how to deal with him. Sima Quan said in a deep voice, "Sect leader Wei's words are not without reason. However, if they really wanted to attack, they should have done it like a thunderbolt. They should not have let us know immediately." Wei Zihong pondered for a moment and said, "That's not strange. Perhaps the other side hasn't made thorough preparations yet. They probably didn't expect us to move so early, so they had no choice but to act hastily. If the 9 Heavens Palace city was destroyed, it would still be secondary. After all, it was just a foothold in the void. If it was lost, it could be rebuilt, so there was nothing to be regretful about. However, if the territory that they had occupied just now was taken back, they could only retreat to their original position and return to the initial confrontation. In that case, the fruits of their hard work over the past few days would be wiped out. Therefore, they had to pay more attention to this matter. Wei Zihong instructed the disciple, "Invite Heaven Lord He here." He Xianyin didn't follow the crowd because there could be someone who could go out to face the enemy at any time. After he arrived, he cupped his hands and said, "Sect leader Wei, do you have any orders?" Wei Zihong waved his sleeves and immediately, scenes appeared in front of them. He said to He Xianyin, "This is the realm I conquered a few days ago, and it is currently being attacked by the monsters. Although there are formations protecting it, I'm afraid that something might happen to it. I'll have to trouble Heavenly Lord He." He Xianyin replied, "I'll go now." After he bowed, he turned into a clear light and left. Peng Xiang reminded him, "Wei Shangzhen, if there's any powerful almighty, we might not be able to fight against them." Wei Zihong nodded. With He Xianyin's appearance, it should be enough to deal with the monsters before them. Even if that didn't work, they could still rely on Ingui. However, if they came back to make more enemies, it seemed like it wasn't enough. Sima Quan suggested, "Daoist Tong Guang and Daoist Guo's journey isn't that important. Now that Constant Heaven sect is fighting, why don't we call them back?" Wei Zihong thought for a while and shook his head, "No need. Most of the cultivators on that journey were mortal metamorphosis cultivators. If there was someone like Constant Heaven sect's sect leader among the invading enemies, then even if they came back, they wouldn't be of much use." However, he had considered this before, so he wasn't completely unprepared. Although the main force sent out this time was the cultivators of Yuhuan's heavens, it didn't mean that this was their full strength. Among the 19 heavens of Yuhuan, Green Jade Palace's Qinghua heaven was the strongest, and there was no lack of Fourth Tribulation Almighty in the secret palace. However, this time, none of these people showed up. This part of their strength had been hidden, and was prepared to be used when necessary. He instructed, "Help me send a letter to the Green Jade Palace." However, just as the disciple was about to carry out the order, he stretched out his hand to stop him. Looking outside, he saw a talisman flying in from outside. His expression changed. "Is it sent by Master?" He held it in his hand and was about to open it just now, when a stream of water vapor floated out and instantly gathered in the hall to form the shadow of a divine beast that was half snake and half tortoise. After seeing it, he hurriedly bowed and said, "Greetings, Venerable One." Sima Quan and Peng Xiang also bowed solemnly. The divine beast Black Tortoise was implicated by Zhang Yan's qi activity, and just now, it had appeared in the world. Under normal circumstances, it would have the same cultivation as Zhang Yan. However, without the black stone, it would definitely not be able to pass the true Yang stage. Because of this, after Zhang Yan achieved the true Yang stage, his strength rose to unprecedented heights, and it was difficult for anyone below the true Yang stage to be a match for him. With the appearance of this person, Wei Zihong and the others felt assured. Even if the elders of Green Jade Palace's secret palace did not come, there was no need to fear the invading enemies. In the void, a boundless and formless monster was entrenched there, accompanied by countless monsters. Dozens of people stood on its back, and at the forefront was a man with horns on his forehead. This was the sect master of the Heavenly Meld sect, Shi Wanzong. The Meld sect and the Constant Sky sect were equally famous, and both were known as the two most powerful sects in the Wanke star stream. The strength of the two sect masters was also comparable, but there was one difference. Shi Wanzong had cultivated to this stage, and although he desperately wanted to break free from the Void Mother's control, he had never held back when it came to sacrificial offerings, and gave his all every time. Although this caused the overall momentum of the sect to be slightly weaker, it also benefited them. For example, not long ago, he had seen signs of the Void Mother's appearance, and guessed that the demon god's believers might be up to something. Therefore, he had been paying attention to it recently, and even vaguely deduced the intentions of Wei Zihong and the others, so he had been making preparations. However, he did not expect that this time, they were not coming for him, but for the Constant Sky sect. At this time, he also saw an opportunity, and decisively led the people of the sect to attack. His only regret was that he was in too much of a hurry, so he could not mobilize all the forces of the sect at once, which was why the attack was a little messy. At this time, a disciple came forward and said, "Sect Master, we have already checked. Even if we get close, no one will come out to stop us." A sect master behind Shi Wanzong took a step forward, and said with a hint of excitement, "It seems that the demon god's believers have come out in full force this time. Sect master, do you want to make a move?" Shi Wanzong did not reply immediately, but took a deep look at Zhoutai Palace, and said, "There's no rush, let's wait a little longer." In his opinion, if the demon god's believers were really empty, then he would not be in such a hurry. If they were prepared, or if they had set up a trap, it would not be so easy to see through it. He had always been a cautious person, so he would rather take it slow, and definitely would not rush head-on like this. After a long time, the other sect masters of the Rong sect arrived with their people, and the number of deities and their descendants gathered also increased. However, everyone was very patient, as they were already used to their sect master's style. They knew that this person would not easily make a move if he was not confident of winning. Moreover, more than half of the people had not arrived, so they could wait a little longer. At this time, another disciple came and reported, "Sect Master, just now, there is news that not only the Constant Sky sect, but the Mo family sect has also started fighting with the demon god's believers." Shi Wanzong smiled playfully, and said, "Did they ask for help?" The disciple lowered his head, and said, "No." Shi Wanzong hummed in acknowledgement. If he chose to go back and join forces with the Constant Sky sect, he might be able to severely injure the demon god's believers if he could make it in time. But why did he do that? Before the demon god's believers arrived, the Rong sect and the Constant Sky sect were rivals, and they had been at odds since the establishment of the Rong sect. If there was no way out, he might choose to join forces with them, but there was no need to do so now. He could directly attack the base of the demon god's believers, which could weaken the Constant Sky sect and hit the enemy's vitals. It could be said to be the best of both worlds. In the palace, after noticing that the enemies had stopped, Wei Zihong observed for a long time before discovering some of the descendants of the deities and monsters, and they did not seem to be simple people. He thought for a while and said, "Call Sect Master Qi here." This time, the elders of the dragon sect also followed Ao Xiao and the others to attack Luo Zhu Tian, but Qi Xiaolan himself stayed here. This was not only because he was slightly weaker, but also because Wei Zihong did not want him, a dragon god who had just now, to lose his life. Qi Xiaolan quickly came to the hall and bowed to the three. Wei Zihong waved his sleeve, and a few figures appeared. He said, "Sect Master Qi, do you recognize these people?" Qi Xiaolan looked over and said, "Wei Shangzhen, I don't know these people, but judging from their style and formation, they are very similar to the people of the Rong sect." The Rong sect? It really is them. Wei Zihong nodded. This was similar to what he had guessed. Now, the only sect that had the ability to control so many deities and monsters and could attack while they were empty was the Rong sect. In his original plan, the Rong sect was his next target. On the list of targets, the Wuqing sect was also one of the choices. However, it was very difficult to obtain information in this world, so in the end, he chose Luo Zhu Tian. Before attacking Luo Zhu Tian, he already knew about the grudge between the two sections. Of course, he did not let his guard down because of this. He had also set up eyes and ears along the way. If he sent people to help the Constant Sky sect, not only would he not call back Ao Xiao and the others, but he would also directly invite all the elders of the Green Jade Palace to intercept them. Since they had chosen to come here, he would not let them go so easily. Chapter 1861. In the miraculous sky, Daoist Tong Guang and Guo Zhuying spent a lot of effort and finally wiped out the monsters outside. Although these god fiends were tiny and their might was only ordinary, they brought a great deal of trouble to them. Especially if they weren't eliminated in one go, so long as a single one of them remained, they would multiply once more until they reached their original size. After repeated attempts, Just Now used a treasure to collect all of them. After wiping out these monsters, the area where the Mo Amalgamation sect was located was completely exposed to everyone. Guo Zhuiying was about to attack when he suddenly felt something strange. Ever since he saw those strange monsters, he had been very vigilant. Looking over, he saw another monster as small as a speck of dust flying toward him, but it was different from the ones Just Now had encountered. As he thought about it, the monster suddenly moved, and a mortal cultivator from Huandu Tian was immediately invaded by it. After a while, halos shot out from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, and then his Dharma body exploded. At the same time, the monster rushed out again and headed for the next target. In just a short time, 5 or 6 cultivators' bodies exploded one after another. But in the next moment, the scattered light gathered again, and the cultivators reformed their Dharma bodies again. They all looked like nothing had happened. Both Daoist Tong Guang and Guo Zhuiying witnessed the entire process with their own eyes, and both of them couldn't help but be amazed. Just now, the monster first crashed into the Dharma bodies of the cultivators with an unavoidable force, and then instantly moved through the millions of parts of their bodies. When it was all over, all of the attacking power it had unleashed was released at the same time. The flow of power was completely in line with the laws of heaven and earth, and the control of power was exquisite and precise. It could be said that a little more would be too much, and a little less would be too little. It could be said that the power of one's level was completely unleashed to its peak. Not only them, but all the cultivators present could see the clues. Although they weren't natives of this place, their understanding of the Great Tao was the same. Some of them were originally disdainful of the 1K starflow, but they didn't expect to see such an exquisite performance from a monster here. However, the opponent's miscalculation was that for the descendants of deities and monsters, other than those who possessed unique supernatural powers, they still relied on their own bodies. Once their bodies were destroyed, it was equivalent to defeat and death. Then, just one deity and monster would be able to block thousands of enemies. However, after a cultivator reached the realm of mortal metamorphosis, they had long abandoned their bodies. As long as their vitality was not exhausted, no matter how many times their bodies were destroyed, they would not be defeated and die. Therefore, their greatest strength had instead become their weakness. Taoist Tong Guang said, "This monster must be the Moksha sect's guardian deity. As expected, it is incomparably powerful. Fortunately, due to its innate limitations, it is still a little lacking in terms of cultivation level. It is unable to transcend the past and future. If it were to reach that step, it would be extremely difficult to deal with." Guo Juying felt lucky and said, "No wonder Shangzhen Wei places so much importance on this place. If such a thing transcends, there won't be many who can fight it head-on." The monster flew like lightning, and its body was extremely small but tough. Normally, it was very difficult to catch. Unfortunately, Shangzhen Wei had treasures in hand. After knowing the details of this thing, it didn't take much effort to restrain it. In the end, they took out a treasure bottle and kept it. Without further delay, they immediately called everyone to attack the land below. The Moksha sect's strength wasn't strong, and for the sake of this guardian deity, they usually sacrificed a lot. Recently, in order to deal with the followers of the demon god, they had to do it more frequently. This almost emptied all their resources, and they didn't even hesitate to annihilate a few large clans in the heaven of strange tides to make up for the deficit. If the Moksha sect dared to do this under normal circumstances, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. However, under the threat of the followers of the demon god, all the conflicts were temporarily suppressed. This brought about a lot of hidden dangers. Now that they saw the enemies attacking, the first thought of many large clans of the blood descendants was to fight the enemies and protect the sect. Instead, they all activated their blood tools and escaped. Taoist Tong Guang and Guo Juying soon found out. The overall strength of this sect was only a so-so. It was far from being as powerful as the rumors said. It seemed that the monster outside was all they had. Even though the sect master led them to fight back, under the siege of the Shangzhen Wei, they didn't last long. In less than 10 days, they were completely wiped out. The sect master of the Moksha sect was also suppressed by a treasure. As for those who escaped, except for a few who had unfathomable supernatural powers, most of them were intercepted. In this battle, at least half of the Moksha sect's blood descendants were killed. The rest surrendered. Taoist Tong Guang and Guo Juying didn't plan to kill them all. Now that there were too many monsters in the void of 1K galaxy, they could still make use of these monsters to deal with the rest of the natives. The group spent about half a month to completely wipe out the monsters in this world. Then, they immediately started to build the restrictive formation altar, ready to completely occupy this domain. Taoist Tong Guang stood high in the sky and said, "Now that this place has been stabilized, we can send the news back." Guo Juying said, "I wonder how Luo Zhutian is doing. We still have some strength left, maybe we can find a way to support Lord Ao's group." Taoist Tong Guang shook his head and said, "This is not something we can decide. Moreover, although we have occupied this place, there are still some fish that slipped through the net. It's hard to guarantee that they won't take advantage of the situation and attract stronger opponents." Guo Juying nodded in agreement. Given the current situation, they could only hope for stability. At the same time, the attacks from the Rong sect's deities in the Nine Heavens Palace became more frequent. However, because they occupied more than 10 worlds, there were many deities from the Taoist cultivators who came to serve them. Previously, they were only used to build the altar's restrictive formation. Now that it was completed, they released all of them to fight against the deities. Although their cultivation levels were much lower, there were many of them. Coupled with the palace's restrictive formation, they were evenly matched for the time being. Shi Wanzong was still patiently watching the battle and didn't seem to have any intention of joining in. At this moment, an elder thought about it and said, "Sect leader, we have been attacking for so long, but the demonic believers still haven't shown any powerful moves. Why don't we?" Shi Wanzong shook his head. The Rong sect's restrictive formation altar didn't seem to have much power in front of it. However, he felt that these people fought at a steady pace and didn't seem to be in a hurry. From their performance, it seemed like they were hiding some powerful killing moves. Not mentioning this, with his cultivation level, it was enough to show that he was on guard. There was a blur in the void, and a disciple appeared in front of him. He bowed to him and said respectfully, "Sect leader, sect elder, me can no longer see the situation at Miraculous Tide Heaven. It seems that Imo Hazong has been invaded by the demonic believers." Shi Wanzong was surprised and frowned. So fast. The most powerful thing about Imo Hazong was that elusive, tiny god fiend. In the 1K stellar stream, there were few god fiends that could win against him. Moreover, he had recently been preparing for a big sacrifice to upgrade this guardian god fiend. If not for the fact that he suspected that the fiend celestial believers were about to attack the grievous emotion sky, he would have tried to suppress them previously. The elder beside him also thought of this and said, "Could it be that Imo Hazong's guardian deity hasn't been mobilized?" The disciple said, "Sect elder, me said that the demonic believers aren't made of flesh and blood, so this guardian deity can't do anything to them. In the end, it seems like it was captured." The sect elder was startled and his expression became extremely grave. Rong Zong had never fought with cultivators before. His understanding of cultivators came from other places. Now that he heard this news, he felt that these devil god believers were more difficult to deal with than he had imagined. Fortunately, no matter which sect's guardian deity or monster, they would only submit to their own sect and would not be used by others. Otherwise, it would be even more troublesome. Shi Wanzong asked, "How is Constant Sky sect now?" The disciple replied, "Elder Mi said that both sides are still locked in battle, but Chang Tian sect's guardian deities have already been released, so the current situation is still unclear." Shi Wanzong did not show anything on the surface, but he was shocked in his heart. He knew that the guardian of the Eternal Sky sect was located on the largest piece of land in the Luo Zhu sky. The entire sect was located on that piece of land. Now that it had been summoned, it was undoubtedly a matter of life and death. The sect elder said in a low voice, "Sect leader, the progress of the demonic believers on both sides is going smoothly. Undoubtedly, they have invested most of their strength, so the place before us must be empty. We can't miss this opportunity." Shi Wanzong thought for a moment, and after a while, his eyes lit up. He said, "Elder AI is right." Actually, he still had some doubts in his heart. However, if he did not make a move now and waited for these demonic believers to digest the results of this battle, their strength would become even stronger. By then, they would definitely be the next ones to be dealt with. By then, it would definitely be impossible for him to have this kind of opportunity again. Therefore, regardless of whether there was a hidden trap ahead, he had to give it a try. However, even at this moment, he was still very careful. With a signal, the sect elder beside him immediately understood and waved his hand. Immediately, more than 10 blood descendants of the deities and monsters flew out and led their clansmen toward the Nine Heavens Palace City. When these people were halfway there, they felt their vision blur. Every one of them felt that the people around them had disappeared, and only a void was left in front of them. They had no idea where they were. However, in a trance, they realized that the scenery in front of them had shattered, and they were pulled back from the illusory realm. Knowing that it was because of the help of their fellow sect members, their morale immediately increased, and they continued to rush toward their target. In the palace city, Sima Quan's expression darkened. He said, "Sect leader Wei, the sect leader of Rong sect's strength is unfathomable. Just now, he has forcefully dragged those people out of the Xian-Yin illusory realm. It seems that using the same method will not be able to stop him." Wei Zihong thought for a while and communicated with the Black Tortoise Divine Will for a moment. Suddenly, he made a decision. He said, "Since they want to come, let them in." Chapter 1862. Wei Zihong felt that if they asked the black tortoise to come out so early, they wouldn't be able to cause much damage to the invading enemies. If they retreated slightly and lured the enemies into this Jotai palace, which was much larger than a continent, even if they couldn't eliminate the enemies, they could still severely injure them. At least the enemies that entered would not be able to escape. Of course, if the other party was more cautious, they could choose to break the city directly. However, breaking through the forbidden array was not something that could be done in a short period of time. Although the other party appeared to be very patient, from the sudden movement just now, they should have received some sort of news. It was very likely that the changes in the battle situation of the two paths had given them pressure. If that was the case, it was unlikely that these people would adopt the strategy of attacking slowly and would most likely choose to take a more aggressive approach. He immediately ordered, except for the people that were sent out, retreat back to the palace. Don't worry about the monsters. The disciple immediately agreed. Not long after, following his order, all the disciples and demonic dragons that were guarding outside retreated into the palace. It seemed that they had given up on defending the outer perimeter and turned to relying on the restrictive formation to defend with all their strength. Because of the monsters blocking the path of retreat, the retreat was very smooth. No one was left outside. Seeing this, Elder Ai said happily, "Sect Master, it looks like it is indeed empty. Otherwise, they wouldn't have abandoned the outer perimeter and retreated into the nest." Shi Wanzong didn't say anything. He was still a bit wary and wasn't so optimistic. Although the situation was smooth, it was just the beginning. What would happen in the future still had to be seen. Because there were no cultivators supporting the rear, the monsters that were responsible for guarding the rear could not hold on any longer. In less than half a day, they were all wiped out. Meanwhile, the monsters of the Rong sect could not wait to rush toward the Jotai Palace. Some unreasonable people, relying on their strong bodies, directly crashed into the city wall. However, at this time, there were all kinds of chi halos surrounding the outside of the palace, and there were also lightning bolts. In the void, as the giant monsters rushed over, they would scatter balls of bright cloud light from time to time. However, except for a few weak spots, the rest of the territories that were enveloped by the light immediately collapsed and melted. There were also some that could transform into nothingness, but they were transferred out of the void realm, and their whereabouts could no longer be found. Over time, even the most savage and unintelligent monsters learned to be obedient. They avoided the realms that could not be invaded and squeezed into the realms that were not too dangerous. Elder Ai suggested, "Sect Master, there is a layer of chi barrier outside the palace. This is the same as when I attack the other realms." All the demonic god believers seem to have such a method. It is very difficult to attack this place. It seems that we can't take it down in a short time. Why don't we just surround it and not attack? Let us first send people to take back the 10 or so realms that were occupied. Shi Wanzong thought about it and rejected the idea. There's nothing special about those realms. Even if we take them back, we can still take them back when the followers of the demonic gods who attacked Chang Tian's sect return. On the other hand, this place, he pointed with his finger, since this generation is so stubbornly guarding this place and is unwilling to retreat, it's obvious that this place is important. There might be important people or important treasures hidden here. This is the place that we need to conquer. Although Elder Ai had a different opinion in private, he still agreed on the surface. Sect Master is right. Shi Wanzong said, "Elder Ai, how long do you think it will take to break through this place?" Elder Ai calculated and replied, "I don't know what the chi barrier is using to maintain it. Just now, there is no sign of it fading. If it continues like this, we can only wear it down with brute force. In that case, we will need about 1 to 2 months. Even if we intensify the attack, it will take at least 20 days. Shi Wanzong frowned and said, "That's too slow. Chang Tian's sect is not in a good situation and is on the brink of destruction. I'm afraid it won't take a month." In half a month, the group of demonic god believers who went out to attack might rush back. Elder Ai, you have to think of a way to speed up the attack. Elder AI felt a little resentful when he heard this. If it was not for Shi Wanzong's insistence on stability and delaying for so long, they might have already broken through this place. He bowed and said, then we can only choose a weak spot to attack. As long as we can break through it and kill our way in, I will be able to send people in continuously. Shi Wanzong weighed the pros and cons. Although it would be a lot of sacrifices and he was a little pained, it was much better than wasting time outside. He sighed and said, let's do it this way. Elder AI received the order and immediately ordered his subordinates to attack the weakest point of the restriction. This time, he seemed to have chosen the right strategy. Under the constant wear and tear of the restriction, it was already too late to repair it. A gap was forcibly torn open and countless monsters swarmed in. It seemed that the process was exceptionally smooth. Shi Wanzong saw that countless monsters were rushing in, but because it was difficult to expand the gap, only a few entered each time. Most of the forces were squeezed at the back and doing nothing. He frowned and said, Elder AI, find a few reliable people and find a few more gaps to break through. This is the old nest of the demonic god believers, so there must be some kind of backup plan. However, if there are obstacles along the way, it will be difficult to retreat and difficult to advance. Elder AI could also see it. It was just that in order to stabilize the results of the battle, and he did not know how much effort it would take to break through the restriction outside, so he had no choice but to do so. Now that he had an idea, he could make arrangements calmly. He acknowledged and ordered his subordinates to split up and look for other gaps. When Wei Zihong saw the monsters rushing in, he also ordered, tell everyone to release the demonic dragons in the palace. Don't be afraid of losing them. The sect will replenish them later. Try to preserve your own lives. The inside of the palace was like another realm, with mountains, rivers, and rivers. None of the monsters that barged in felt that the space was narrow at all. However, there were also restrictions here, and there were also countless dragon demons fighting with them, so the progress was very slow. Peng Xiang suggested, there are also many blood descendants that have come to serve us. Why don't we ask them to go up as well? Wei Zihong thought for a moment. These blood descendants were actually very useful, but in order to attract more enemies, he had to find a way to show that his side was already strong on the outside but weak on the inside. So, it was necessary to send them up. Even if all of them died, it would be worth it if they could hurt the fusion sect. So he nodded and agreed. However, he also knew that it was not good to force them, so he added, tell them that those who contribute will be rewarded with superior techniques. In next to no time, those bloodline descendants of the fiend gods led their clansmen to go up as well. Even though they were slightly unwilling in their hearts, after they'd signed the contract, it was difficult for them to go against the order. Coupled with the temptation of a superior technique, it really moved a portion of them, and for a time, they blocked off the fiend gods that surged over like a tidal wave. At this moment, Sima Quan suddenly said, Sect Master Wei, the Green Jade Palace's secret palace elders have arrived at 1K Starstream. What should we do next? Wei Zihong's eyes lit up, and he said, they've arrived. That's great. He quickly thought about it, and then said, tell the elders that they don't have to show up for now. When the enemy retreats, be sure to block their way back. Stop as many as you can. He was also a little excited. He never thought that there would be such a good opportunity before him. Constant Heaven Sect and the Fusion Sect were undoubtedly the two biggest forces in 1K Starstream. If they could be defeated, there would be almost no force in 1K Starstream that could fight them head-on. Then, they could continue to seize the world and spread spiritual vigor. From the news that came back, there was no doubt that Constant Heaven Sect would be destroyed. The Fusion Sect's surprise attack this time was a surprise. He did not expect to kill all of them, but if he could kill a large number of people from their sect, it could pave the way for the next attack. After Elder AI arranged for his men to go down, because Wei Zihong had deliberately given in, they quickly opened up a few breakthroughs. However, it was too smooth, which made him suspicious. However, after looking at it several times, he felt that there were no flaws. In fact, apart from the black tortoise, there were not many forces left in the palace. This could be considered as a true reflection. After confirming that there were no suspicious points, he became a little bolder. In one breath, he sent 30% of the men he brought this time, including more than 20 sect elders. According to his estimation, it should not be difficult to break in. Even if there were any changes, he could withdraw his men in time and not suffer too many losses. On the other hand, after the group of gods and monsters that had attacked the palace obtained this assistance, their momentum grew, and they instantly pressured the defensive forces within the palace to the point of steadily retreating. Merely a few days later, the hall that Wei Zihong and the others resided in had suddenly appeared within sight. With the help of the gods and monsters, Elder AI could clearly see the situation. It was clear that they had already attacked the center of the palace. He immediately sent an order to the sect elders, telling them to break into the palace no matter what price they had to pay. Wei Zihong and the others in the hall could hear the rumbling and the shaking of the hall from time to time. They knew that the restriction would not last for long, but he was not anxious at all. He calmly looked at the situation. The fusion sect was still quite cautious. At this moment, it seemed that no matter how the progress was, they would not send more people. Since that was the case, he did not need to wait any longer. He said to Sima Quan, sect leader Sima Quan, please tell the elders of Green Jade Palace that we are ready to move. Then, he bowed to the Black Tortoise and said, Venerable Black Tortoise, please make your move. The long snake behind the Black Tortoise swayed, and its body coiled. Then, there was a rumbling sound, as if a monstrous wave was surging out. Everyone, including Wei Zihong, felt as if their bodies were being pushed left and right by the wave, but in reality, there was no wave. All of this was all because they had sensed some kind of change in the future, and out of instinct to seek fortune and avoid disaster, they could not help but move along with it. At the same time, the Black Tortoise raised its head and let out a deafening roar at the void. The fusion sect elders and the gods and monsters were originally still rushing forward, but in an instant, it was as if a wave had brushed past all of them, but they did not feel it at all. The next moment, as the roar sounded, all the people of the fusion sect who had rushed into the palace, regardless of their cultivation level, whether they were gods or monsters, or descendants of gods or monsters, were all disintegrated and turned into nothingness. Shi Wanzong's expression changed when he saw this. He could see that this was clearly a powerful being interfering with the shadow of the future. As long as one did not act according to the person's will, they would be rejected and everything would be wiped out. The person who attacked was at the same cultivation level as him, but his foundation was much deeper. The followers of the demon gods were here, but such a powerful being was just now hiding and not moving. It was clear that he was plotting against them, and he might have some other tricks up his sleeves. When he realized this, he immediately knew that something was wrong. He said sternly, "Pass down my order, gather the people and retreat quickly." Chapter 1863. Shi Wanzong gave the order. Before the people below could react, a clear voice was heard. It penetrated through the deep void and was transmitted over at a moderate speed. "Since everyone has come, why are you in such a hurry to leave?" Shi Wanzong turned around and saw a green-robed Daoren standing there. His sleeves were like smoke, and his eyebrows and hair were like snow. However, when he looked at him, he looked extremely unreal, as if he was an illusion. Shi Wanzong's expression froze. This person gave him an unusually dangerous feeling. Even if he was not as strong as the person in Jiutai Palace, he was not weaker than him. Shi Wanzong immediately felt that something was wrong. He did not have the confidence to deal with the person in the palace, and now there was another strong enemy here. This was not Rong sect's territory, and the guardian deities were still in the sect. He was the only one who could fight these two opponents. Not only that, if he continued to delay, the fiend celestial believers who attacked Chang Tian's sect could turn back at any time. For a moment, he found himself in an extremely dangerous situation. If he was unlucky, he could be left here. Although Elder AI had received the order to retreat, he did not dare to act recklessly when he saw the green-robed Daoren blocking his way. He transmitted his voice, "Sect leader, what should we do?" As the leader of a sect, Shi Wanzong was able to make a decision at this crucial moment. He said in a low voice, "Elder AI, bring your men and retreat first. I'll bring up the rear." He laughed coldly. "This junior can't take me down." Elder AI knew that hesitation was the worst thing to do in such a situation, so he gritted his teeth and accepted the order. At this moment, he heard a voice say, "If we can't escape, I'd rather sacrifice everyone to the void than subdue the fiend celestial believers. Do you understand?" His heart trembled, and he lowered his head. "Yes." He immediately called for everyone to retreat the way they came. Because the disciples and elders who had invaded the palace were all dead, the rest of the people from the sects were all here. Therefore, they moved very quickly. They only needed to pass down the order before they disappeared one by one using the void-traversing god beasts. The green-robed Daoran opposite him was Elder Chiu Chung of Green Jade Palace's secret palace. Like Ao Xiao and Cheng Li, he had also reached the fourth tribulation of transcendence. It was just that Fu Qingming had decreed that no one from the secret palace was allowed to interfere in the affairs of the outside world, so he had never shown up in the outside world. But this time, in order to deal with the people of the Rong sect, he was invited here by a letter. When he saw Elder AI retreating with the people, he just gave him an indifferent glance and stood there without moving. This time, he was not the only elder from the secret palace who came. He was only responsible for keeping an eye on Sect Master Rong. As for the ordinary deity's descendants, he would leave them to the other elders to deal with. At this moment, a ball of mystic water suddenly surged out of the Nine Heavens Palace. When it reached the void, it suddenly condensed, and the Xian Wu Dharma body appeared. The snake head on its back was held high, and it stared at Shi Wanzong. Chiu cupped his hands and said, "Chiu Chung to greet you." The snake head on Black Tortoise's back nodded slightly in return. Shi Wanzong cautiously looked towards where the Black Tortoise was. However, the result caused him to be shocked. Even when facing someone like Chiu Chung, he was unable to see through the exact situation, but he was still able to see some signs of the future. Even though the future was constantly changing, it was not difficult for him to determine what he should do next. This was also the reason why he dared to stand here. However, at this moment, when he faced the Black Tortoise, there was only a ball of essence water vapor in his eyes. There was nothing else. Ever since he cultivated the boundless nether space, he had never encountered such a thing. He immediately extinguished the last thought of defeating his opponent. Instead, he kept thinking about how he could escape safely. But even if he wanted to escape, he could not make it too obvious. Instead, he had to find a way to threaten his opponent so that they would not dare to force him into a desperate situation. Only then could he achieve his goal. As a sect leader, in order to deal with the demon god's believers, he had sacrificed the Void Mother several times. He had already figured out that in the battle against the demon god's believers, he must first grasp their roots. If the roots were uncertain and their vitality was not exhausted, he would never be able to kill them. But knowing was one thing, and how to catch the root fruit was another. Ordinary deities and monsters didn't have the ability to deduce the root fruit, so in the end, they could only compete with cultivators in terms of their foundation and see who would be exhausted first. But for someone like him who had cultivated to the boundless nether space, he could pay a part of himself to ask the Void Mother. In this way, he could instantly find out where his opponent's roots were. Such a price was irreversible. He could either lose his eternal life or part of his body or blood essence. The greater the price, the more detailed the answer he could get. Now that he was facing two opponents, he could only make this choice. But he still wanted to pay with his life, so he only threw out a drop of blood essence. Don't underestimate this point. It was actually the root of his problem. It meant that when he cultivated the divine essence of the underworld in the future, the amount of divine essence he absorbed would be reduced by 10% to 20%. It would be a great loss to his strength, but it was already the least of all the costs. At the same time, he vaguely felt something in his mind. It was where Chiu Chang's roots were. Although he was constantly moving, he could still pin it down and not let it escape. If he attacked like this, he might be able to defeat Chiu Chang's Dharma. But he did not forget that there was still a black tortoise. His body swayed, and his entire body suddenly changed. He turned from a human to a lion-headed deity, and with another swaying, he split into 5 bodies. 3 of them faced the black tortoise, 1 stood in the middle, and the last one faced Chiu Chang. These 5 bodies could be said to be his original body. Every one of them had 60 to 70% of his magic power, but they could only exist in the world for a moment. Even so, this short moment was enough for him to do many things. Chiu Chang first felt a sense of danger, as if his roots had been deduced by his opponent. He could not help but frown. He did not use his roots to avoid it, but his opponent could see through him. This was definitely not an ordinary method. He kept moving, and at the same time, he took out a single-horned, gold-plated crouching bull from his sleeve. It was small and exquisite, and could be held in one hand. He tossed it out. The clone that was facing him suddenly turned into a strange worm. It seemed to have no qualms about swallowing the golden bull. Chiu Chang expressionlessly took out a seal, and the golden bull appeared in his palm again. However, with this item, he was already clear of the other party's weaknesses and flaws. He held the item with one hand and pointed forward with the other. The strange worm immediately broke apart bit by bit. Every time it was removed, its aura would weaken, and the speed was getting faster and faster. The 3 clones that were facing the black tortoise were even more miserable. They could not resist at all and almost collapsed in an instant. However, with this delay, Shi Wanzong, who was standing in the middle, hugged his body. Then, a thick cocoon appeared on his body, and in an instant, his entire body was wrapped in it. After Chiu Chang finished dealing with the avatar, he looked at the thick cocoon a few times, but did not feel anything strange. He waved his hand and shot a ray of clear light onto it, but what surprised him was that with a kacha sound, the object was easily broken by him, but the inside was empty, and the sect master of the Rong sect had disappeared without a trace. Chiu Chang pondered for a moment. He first bowed to the black tortoise, then turned around and went to the 9 Heavens Palace. When Wei Zihong saw him, he bowed and said, "Thank you, Elder Chiu, for coming to help." Chiu Chang did not boast about his identity. Instead, he bowed politely. He said, "There's no need to thank me for not being able to capture this person. However, although this person has escaped, I can conclude that he has paid a huge price. Sect Master Wei, you should kill him as soon as possible." Wei Zihong deeply agreed. The Rong sect had been severely defeated, and the sect master had fled in panic. If he did not eliminate him before he recovered, should he wait for him to catch his breath before fighting with him? He asked, "Elder Chiu, can you help me again this time?" Chiu Chang smiled and said, "I came on orders. I will naturally follow your wishes, fellow Taoist." At the same time, on the other side of the void, on a floating land, a stone embryo swayed and gradually produced meridians and vitality. Then, it peeled off layer by layer, and Shi Wanzong emerged from it. He secretly rejoiced, "Fortunately, I obtained the mystical ability of this chaotic spirit child, and these fiend celestial believers do not know my background. Otherwise, it would not have been so easy for me to escape today." The source of his ancestral meridian was the space Shua, which could change into a myriad of forms. It could depict living beings and control the mystical abilities of various spirits. In short, he could change into the appearance of other gods and then easily use the mystical abilities that these gods and monsters had. After he cultivated to the boundless dark space, he went to the void and personally killed this god and sacrificed it along with millions of descendants, wiping it out from the source. From then on, other than him, there was no longer a descendant of the space Shua in the world. In the hundreds of thousands of years that followed, he slaughtered many gods and monsters since ancient times and obtained their mystical abilities. Not to mention his combat ability, just his survival technique was far superior to the other blood descendants of the gods and monsters. He looked back at the 9 Heavens Palace, but he did not dare to stay there for long. He leaped and returned to the Rong sect. Luo Zhu Tian. The land where the Constant Heaven sect was originally located had collapsed, and wreckage was everywhere. A giant, dead god floated in the void. Ao Xiao, Qing Li, and a group of cultivators who had arrived were all standing on its body. Under the joint attacks of all the true experts, they had finally taken down this world. Due to the fact that they were well prepared for this battle and that it was a surprise attack, none of the heavenly lords were injured. Only a few of their first and second heavenly tribulation clones were destroyed. On the Constant Heaven sect's side, 2/3 of the sect elders and clan leaders had died in battle. Other than a few who escaped, the rest had pledged their allegiance to the sect. The sect leader of the Constant Heaven sect, Yi Wujiu, was very powerful and difficult to kill. In the end, the two of them worked together to suppress him with a treasure. They planned to bring him back and deal with him later. At this time, Ao Xiao felt movement in his sleeve. He took out a talisman that he had refined beforehand. Lines of words appeared on the talisman. He said, "Sect leader Wei has sent a letter." Qing Li said, "Just in time. We can report this matter to our superiors." Ao Xiao took a look at the talisman and saw that it mentioned the Rong sect's attack. It also said that if the Constant Heaven sect resisted, he and Qing Li should quickly return and attack the Rong sect together. He passed the talisman to Qing Li and said, "Fellow Taoist, please take a look." Qing Li took the talisman and looked at it. His expression changed, and he said, "If we can defeat the Rong sect, the 1K star stream will no longer be obstructed. We should go and meet up with them. We can leave the rest of the matters here to you." Ao Xiao had the same idea. However, he thought about it again and said, "Fellow Taoist, instead of returning to the Nine Heavens Palace, we should directly attack the Rong sect." Chapter 1864. Qiu Chong waited for Wei Zihong to contact Ao Xiao and Qing Li. Then, he suggested that Wei Zihong go to the Rong sect alone, and the others could follow him. Wei Zihong agreed, but traveling through the void was not an easy task. He immediately set up an altar, burned incense, and asked for several protective talismans from Xianyuan heaven. After receiving the protective talismans, Qiu Chong immediately bid farewell to Wei Zihong and the others and chased after the Rong sect. Sima Quan asked, "Sect Master Wei, is it appropriate for Elder Qiu to go alone?" Wei Zihong replied, "Lord Ao Tian has sent news that the Everlasting Heaven sect has been taken down and will rush to the Rong sect. Elder Qiu and these two should not be a problem." At this time, a clear light came from outside the palace. It was the elders of Green Jade Palace returning one by one. The leader was an elder with the surname Lu. He reported that most of the people from the Rong sect had been killed by them. Only a small number of people with remarkable abilities had managed to escape. However, there was an obscure chi screen in the depths of the void, making it difficult for them to chase after the Rong sect. Wei Zihong cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your trouble, elders. There is only one more thing that will require your help." Lu Changdaoren said, "Please speak, Sect Master Wei." Wei Zihong said, "Now that Elder Qiu has gone alone to chase after the Rong sect master, although I have sent a letter to Lord Ao and Lord Qing to go with me to Wuqing Heaven, for the sake of safety, I hope that the elders can go and receive him." When Elder Lu heard this, he immediately agreed. After receiving the two protective talismans from Wei Zihong, he called for his fellow disciples to enter the void again. This time, Wei Zihong did not ask the Black Tortoise to go with him because it was difficult to say if there were other gods and monsters coveting this place. It would be a joke if he sent out all his forces at once and caused the domain they had occupied to be taken back. Moreover, even if the Rong sect could not take it down, they had still won the battle. Now was the time to digest the results of the battle, so there was no need to take risks. Xianyuan Heaven, Qinghuan Palace. Zhang Yan sat on a praying mat and observed the river of karma. He found that the situation was very favorable to him. The moment Luo Zhutian and Mo Hetian's realms fell, the inspiration will arrangement was pushed forward by a large margin. The general trend of the heavenly secrets was clearly leaning towards him. But that didn't mean that it was the end of the world. In the river of heavenly secrets, there were still many spies planted by that person. Even if he didn't care about the methods that person might have hidden, on the surface, there was still room for him to struggle. Take the vile emotion sky as an example. As long as it was not conquered, there would be changes. The 1K star stream still had a lot of forces, but they were fighting on their own and were scattered all over the place. But if they were forced to a dead end, it was not impossible to unite them. If they were to advance further, they might even be able to take back the territories that the cultivators had occupied. Although they might not be able to accomplish it, as long as there was a sliver of a possibility, it meant that the karma had not been severed and the mysteries of the heavens had not been determined. Therefore, the current benefits did not mean that the situation was truly stable. It still depended on the following battles. At this moment, he saw his disciple Wei Zihong send people to chase after Shi Wanzong and nodded slightly. This was the right choice. The outcome of this battle was enough to determine the direction of the future. The Constant Heaven sect and the Rong sect were the two major forces of the 1K star stream. The Constant Heaven sect had already been destroyed, leaving only the Rong sect. This sect's destiny and strength were mostly tied to the sect leader, Shi Wanzong. If this person was defeated, then the Rong sect would be more than half destroyed. With the Rong sect, it would not be difficult to occupy the vile emotion sky. The 1K star stream was left with only a few scattered and weak realms. Even if it could be controlled, it would be difficult to face the cultivators head-on. But if he could sense it, the person behind him could also sense it. However, when the latter clashed with his supernatural power, because both sides had endless supernatural power, they maintained a stalemate. But if one of them dared to withdraw their power to do something else, then the frontal attack would definitely be weakened, and in turn, more realms would be occupied by the opponent. Therefore, as long as there was no additional power at the true sun level, the two of them would not take the initiative to care. But there was another possibility. If the person behind Shi Wanzong had already planted a secret weapon on him, then there was no way to stop it. Therefore, there were many variables here. It was hard to know what would happen until the final result appeared. In the void of the 1K star stream, after Shi Wanzong escaped, he turned into a monster that was good at escaping and fled at the fastest speed. There were no accidents along the way, and he soon returned to the territory of the Rong sect. Here, he finally relaxed a little. Even if all the people he brought with him were destroyed, there were still dozens of clan elders and protectors in the sect. The lost power could be recruited elsewhere. He believed that at this time, there would be many descendants of the monsters who would be willing to join the Rong sect. After entering the sect, he told his subordinates to guard carefully and sat in meditation. He absorbed the underworld divine essence from the void to restore his vitality. Chiu Chong was very accurate. In order to escape, he had paid a price. Not only had his strength been permanently damaged, but he would also be weak for a period of time. When he returned, he faintly felt a trace of danger in his heart. He was afraid that the followers of the demon god would chase after him, so he hurriedly replied. After a few days, everything was peaceful. He felt that he had recovered, but because of the loss of blood essence, the lost strength could not be recovered. He could not help but sigh. When he came out of meditation, he asked the servant, "Is Elder AI back?" The servant replied, "Yes, he's back, but he came back one day later than the Lord. The other clan elders have also returned to the sect these few days." When Shi Wanzong heard that Elder AI had returned, he was happy at first. Then, he heard news about the other clan elders and felt that something was wrong. He guessed that something had happened on the way. He urgently needed to understand the situation, so he said, "Invite Elder AI over." Elder AI quickly came and bowed. "Greetings, Lord. It is the sect's great fortune that you are safe and sound." Shi Wanzong nodded and said, "Elder AI, what happened to you and the others? Why are only you and the few elders back?" Elder AI looked ashamed and said, "Sect Master, on the way back, we were intercepted by a few followers of the demon god. They seemed to be from the same place as the person whom Sect Master set up. They were very powerful, so I could only order them to scatter and escape. I believe most of them did not manage to escape. I have failed you, Sect Master, please punish me. Shi Wanzong said in a deep voice, if that's the case, we can't blame Elder AI. Now that you're back, there's no need to think so much. I have something to tell you. Elder AI hurriedly said, Lord, please instruct me. Shi Wanzong instructed through telepathy, the situation is not right now. We need to make plans as soon as possible. I have a backup plan in Ye and Y Rojie. Bring the elite descendants of the sect and all the treasures in the treasury to this place immediately. If anything happens, we can still turn the tables in the future. After Elder AI heard this, she bowed silently and retreated. After Shi Wanzong finished speaking, he went back to cultivate. In less than 2 days, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He looked up and saw Chiu Cheng appearing in the sky with 2 people standing beside him. Their strength seemed to be about the same. His expression changed. If it was just Chiu Cheng alone, he would have been able to fight with the people of his sect. However, there were 2 fiend celestial believers of similar strength. It was impossible for him to defeat them. For a moment, he could not help but feel thankful for the arrangements he made a few days ago. He thought about it and felt that the followers of the demon god would invade the world no matter where they went. It was very likely that they had their eyes on the land under his feet. If that was the case, he would give it to them and leave. As long as he preserved his strength, no matter where he went, he would have a chance to rise again. He was the leader of the sect. Even if he had to abandon the sect's foundation, he should have weighed the pros and cons. However, for some reason, he did not feel any reluctance. If it was any other time, he would definitely examine himself. However, he did not have the time to care about this now. He immediately sent out an order for everyone to escape on their own. Then, he came to the hall, separated his finger and dripped his blood. After a while, a cloud of smoke spurted out from under the exquisite stone platform in the hall. A muscular, golden-skinned, white-eyed deity with bared fangs appeared. This was the guardian deity of the Rong sect. Even he might not be able to defeat it. However, he did not order it to stop the enemy. Instead, he prepared to bring it away. He wiped the blood on his wrist and the deity turned back into a wisp of smoke and went back into the hall. Then, he shook his body and turned into a snakefish deity. He turned into a white light and escaped into the sky. At this moment, Chiu Cheng was holding the single-horned golden bull. He was calculating the whereabouts of Shi Wanzong. Suddenly, he looked towards the sky and was surprised. Elder Chiu, have you found the whereabouts of this person? Ao Shao asked. Chiu Cheng replied, if I'm not mistaken, this person has abandoned the sect. Both of you, please follow me. He took a step forward and chased after the wisp of qi. Although Ao Shao and Cheng Li were puzzled as to why Shi Wanzong would abandon his own sect, this was not the time to ask questions. They immediately circulated their transcendence energy and followed after him. Just now, Shi Wanzong had escaped for a while. However, he saw a ray of clear light descending and blocking his path. Then, he heard the sound of a chime and saw Chiu Cheng walking out. He said calmly, World Sect Master, where do you want to go? Why don't you tell me? Perhaps I can send you on your way. Shi Wanzong cursed inwardly. He looked to his left and right and saw Ao Shao and Cheng Li appearing one after the other. He was shocked. He knew that he had no chance of winning. Instead, he calmed down and said, You are just a pawn of the devil god. Do you think that you can take me down with just this? He stretched out his hand and slashed at himself. In an instant, his body turned ethereal. Then, the shadows of many deities and monsters appeared. He could transform into hundreds and thousands of deities and monsters. If each deity and monster had a wisp of future, then he would be able to derive hundreds and thousands of future transformations from his body. Now that he had severed many futures, he was only hoping for a path of survival. Once the karma was formed, he would definitely be able to escape. However, this meant that he only had this path of future transformations. The many deities and monsters that he had fused with in the past would all be discarded. His hundreds of thousands of years of hard work would all be for naught. Moreover, if he were to meet someone of the same realm, they would be able to easily predict his every move and defeat him effortlessly. However, as long as he could escape this calamity, he would be able to find a way to fuse with other deities and monsters when he returned. Even if he had to spend hundreds of thousands of years, it would still be better than being attacked by the devil god's believers. Qiu Chong saw that Shi Wanzong had disappeared after his slash. It was as if he had blended into the void. Qiu Chong tried to predict his movements, but it was blurry and it was difficult to see the results. He said, "This person has escaped again. If we want to find him, we'll have to do some more calculations." Ao Shao looked down and said, "It's all right. Without this person and the fusion sect, the grievous emotion sky is powerless to defend itself. We can report back to Sect Master Wei and occupy this place. Then, the two great worlds of Wanke Galaxy will be in our hands." Chapter 1865. Because the sect master had given the order to scatter, no one in the Harmony sect resisted. However, there were still some clever people who didn't leave and decided to join the followers of the devil god. The news that the Chang Heaven sect had been destroyed was no secret. Some of the large clans of the Harmony sect saw that the void devil god was likely to occupy the stars and suppress the world, so they began to search for a path of retreat. As the two realms collided, Zhang Yan sensed that the fate of the heavens was tilting toward him once more. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before he came into contact with the person behind the scenes. The only flaw here was that Shi Wanzong had escaped, so the fate of the heavens was still unclear. There was still a trace of uncertainty. This also confirmed his previous speculation that the person behind the scenes had indeed planted a trap on the sect master of the Harmony sect. Perhaps it could be said that every god descendant that had reached a certain cultivation level had been unknowingly planted a trap like this. However, this person didn't seem to care about it before, but now that he had noticed it, he had interfered. This also meant that this person had begun to take the initiative to care about the inner realm. Fortunately, he now had the advantage. As long as he could hold his ground, the other party would have to put in a lot more effort than him. Unless his disciples made a series of mistakes, it would be difficult for him to have another chance. Furthermore, the more bets one placed on certain living beings, the greater the consequences would be if the living being was defeated. Inside Jiutian Palace, when Wei Zihong heard that Nightmare Emotion Sky had lost its ability to resist, he reacted quickly. He immediately sent a group of disciples to occupy this place. However, the Harmony sect was different from the Chang Heaven sect. Its territory hadn't experienced a fierce battle, and there were too many natives there, so it took a bit longer to settle down. However, it only took 2 months before everything was settled and this place became part of their formation. When Wei Zihong saw that Shi Wanzong and the Rong sect's guardian deities and monsters were on the run, he asked Ao Shao and Qing Li to oversee the Luo Zhu Heaven, Qiu Chong and the Green Jade Palace's elder to oversee the Wu Qing Heaven, and Daoist Tong Guang and Guo Juing to oversee the Mo Hetian Heaven. Each of them continued to lead their subordinates and ordered their disciples to quickly build the altar's restrictive formation. After that, he sent out letters again, inviting the genuine ones to Jiutai Palace City for a discussion. About 60 days later, the avatars met again in the palace. This time, Wei Zihong had come up with a grand plan. On the surface, the two major powers of the Wanke star stream had been uprooted. However, this did not mean that there was no more power to resist. There were some sects that couldn't compare to the fusion sect, but they could still compete with sects like the Mohihi sect. As for how to wipe them out and where they should go next, these were all things that needed to be discussed. However, the most important thing was to discuss their contributions. This was also the matter that the genuine ones were most concerned about. Wei Zihong stood on the host's seat with Yuan Zun's decree above his head. He looked down at the crowd and said in a loud voice, "In this battle, the 8 Yuhuan cultivators, Chang Su, and their descendants did not listen to orders and acted on their own. Fortunately, they did not suffer any consequences and did not implicate the overall situation. Therefore, they will be punished with 3 punishments. First, all of their previous contributions will be erased, and the medicinal pills and spirit cleansing pills used in the Wankei battle will be compensated accordingly. Second, the 8 of them and their disciples will guard the Wankei domain for 10,000 years, and they will not be allowed to leave without orders. Third, they will not receive any merit books, and their merits will not be recorded for the next 100,000 years. Chang Su and the others also came this time. He wasn't afraid that his merits would not be recorded, as he had already thought of this beforehand. However, he was a little regretful because in this battle, because of Wei Zihong's proper arrangement and ample preparation, as well as the fact that he had the absolute advantage, there were no casualties from the start to the end. This was the complete opposite of what he had expected, which was that the Yuhuan cultivators would suffer heavy casualties. Now, everyone had achieved great merits, but they had missed this opportunity. Although the few people who came with him did not say anything, he could tell that they were also resentful. This was his mistake, so he promised to compensate them later, and finally calmed everyone down. However, when he heard that they had to guard here and that their past contributions would be erased, and that everyone would not be able to count their merits for the next 100,000 years, he couldn't help but stand up and said, "Wei Shangzhen, I don't agree with this." Wei Zihong looked at him and said, "Chang Shangzhen, what do you disagree with?" Chang Su said angrily, "It wasn't our original intention to not meet up with the other Zenrens. It's just that when we were patrolling earlier, we encountered a powerful deity, and it was difficult for us to escape. That's why we were delayed. How can I accept this as punishment?" Wei Zihong said lightly, "I see. Then, Chang Shangzhen, do you dare to swear that you didn't do this out of selfishness, and you didn't purposely avoid the transfer order? As long as you dare to swear, I will immediately take back this order, and in front of everyone, I will write a letter of apology to the Green Jade Palace." Chang Su panicked. He didn't expect Wei Zihong to do this. He didn't even ask if one was right or wrong, but directly questioned one's heart. Yet, this move was extremely effective. This time, he really did have selfishness. At this moment, someone stood up and said, "Wei Shangzhen is slightly inappropriate. Even if he really did have selfishness, I don't think this matter was because of his selfishness. If there really was an accident, wouldn't he be falsely accusing a good person?" Wei Zihong looked over and saw that it was an elder surnamed Mao from the Green Jade Palace. From their relationship, he should be Chang Su's senior. No wonder he stood up for Chang Su. He laughed and said, "I originally wanted to save some face for the Zenrens. Since that's the case, I'll ask the Zenrens to look back and verify the truth." The elder surnamed Mao's expression changed slightly. He was silent for a while, then looked up at Chang Su and sighed, "There's no need. Let's do as Jinren Wei said." Chang Su's expression was extremely gloomy. This punishment meant that he wouldn't be able to make a comeback for at least 100,000 years. He was already prepared to enter the realm of enlightenment. Now, he had to use all the precious pills and spiritual qi he had accumulated to repay the mountain and sea realm, as well as to compensate for the losses of his fellow Taoists. More importantly, he was already considered outstanding among his peers, but in the future, he would undoubtedly fall behind. After Wei Zihong dealt with Chang Su, he didn't pay attention to him anymore. As for whether or not Chang Su obeyed him, because they were fellow Taoists, there was no need to swear an oath. Now, there was no need to be so courteous. In a moment, he would ask Chang Su to sign a contract. If he dared to have any other thoughts in the future, he would just have to swear an oath. Next, he invited the Green Jade Palace's Hall Elder Feng Lan to come out and announce their contributions. Following that, he gave out a large amount of rewards. In a short period of time, everyone benefited greatly. Just now, the gloomy atmosphere was swept away. This scene made those who followed Chang Su extremely envious. Although they looked indifferent on the surface, as if they didn't care, they were cursing him in their hearts. Seeing that everyone was satisfied, Wei Zihong continued, "Although the two realms are at peace, there is still one thing that hasn't been settled. Rong Sect's sect leader, Shi Wanzong, is still out there. If we don't get rid of him, our rear will be uneasy. Does anyone have any ideas?" As he said, as long as Shi Wanzong didn't die, it would be difficult for them to attack. After conquering 2 realms, the Taoist cultivators could send their people out to attack the other realms. However, they didn't dare to do so now. This was because if they attacked the other realms, Shi Wanzong might take advantage of the situation to attack them. Ao Shao said, according to the elders of the Rong sect who joined us, they secretly withdrew a portion of their people before we arrived. They also took away the sect's secret treasures. I have checked the treasury, and it is indeed empty. This means that Shi Wanzong has prepared a way out after he returned. He and the remaining members of the Rong sect should be hiding in some realm now. As long as we find them, we can eliminate this trouble. Wei Zihong thought for a while and said, have you found any clues? Chiu Chong said, I am still calculating. This person has been hit by my golden bull seal, so I will know where he goes no matter where he goes. However, there is a Weili force that interferes with this place, causing his qi activity to be unpredictable. If we want to get any results, it will take some time. Wei Zihong thought for a while. If they didn't get rid of this person, it would hinder their plan. He said, if he retreated like this, there will be some clues. I will have to trouble you to investigate further. Ao Shao and Chiu Chong agreed. The elder with the surname Mao suggested, since I am afraid that he will attack the rear, why don't we use this method to set up a trap and lure him to attack? Wei Zihong looked at him and knew that he had stepped forward to ease the tension. He nodded and said, we can first ensure that the restrictive formations of the realms are stable. We can discuss this matter after they are built. 1K Star Stream, Soft Sky. This place was filled with violent storms, mountain fires, and earthquakes. Apart from a few deities that hunted for a natural spiritual creature called the Fire Mother Cold Embryo, very few living beings came here. However, at this moment, in a deep trench underground, a white worm-like monster with a back covered with long whiskers was lying there. This was the transformation of Shi Wanzong. As he had cut off many of the monster transformations, leaving only this one in front of him, and he had used it to escape, he was momentarily affected by the karma and could not transform back. However, he didn't feel dejected at all. Instead, he felt a sense of confidence that came from somewhere. At this moment, there was a flash of light nearby, an elder AI's figure appeared. He bowed and said, Sect Master, the disciples have settled down. They won't be discovered by the demon god believers for the time being. To guard against the demon god's believers, Shi Wanzong and his disciples were stationed separately. The latter were arranged to stay in Dai Sky. Shi Wanzong said, hide for the time being and don't show your faces. We will make plans after I recover. After you have settled everything, find a few elders and follow me here. I have something to do. Elder AI immediately agreed. Shi Wanzong looked into the depths of the void. For some reason, he could always sense the locations of deities that had been in hibernation since ancient times. He thought that he could find them and kill them to steal their blood essence and divine arts so that he could quickly recover his strength. However, the ancient deities were extremely powerful. With his current abilities, even with the help of the guardian deities, he still wasn't enough. Therefore, he only dared to make a move after finding the elders of the sect. Once he succeeded, he could still fight against the demon god's believers after he returned. Chapter 1866. After Bai Wei, Deng Zhang, Qi Yao, and the others moved from the void primordial sea to 1K Star Stream, they worked together to open up a large heaven called Five Towering Heaven. The 5 of them huddled together in order to guard against the human path's attack. Normally, they cultivated on their own and did not disturb each other. However, in the past few days, the 5 of them all felt uneasy. After deducing, they found out that the 2 important heavenly domains of the natives had been seized by the human Tao, and the fate of the heavens on both sides had clearly changed. As such, they each passed down their divine wills and discussed about this matter. Heng Jing sighed, 1K Star Stream's fate has already been lost. If this continues, this place might be taken over by the human path. We came here to find a way out, but now it seems like we might not be able to hide for long. Deng Zhang said with certainty, the fate of heaven is always changing, and the outcome has yet to be seen. Until the end, no one knows the outcome. Now is not the time to make a judgment. Heng Jing said, it's not that I'm lying, but that person has yet to give an accurate explanation. How can we be at ease? After the 5 of them arrived, they could feel that person's presence. However, the person had never spoken to them, nor did he tell them what he wanted them to do. It was as if after he summoned them, he did not care about them anymore. Qi Yao looked at Deng Zhang and Bai Wei and said, that person is not willing to see me, but we can find a way to see him. Are you willing to give it a try? Bai Wei thought for a while and said, that person's magical power is not below that of Daoist Zhang. He must have been a Vedanta in the past. He must have made arrangements, but the time is not right yet. Otherwise, wouldn't it be unnecessary to ask me to come here? Moreover, some of the scenes that we have witnessed have already been verified, while some have yet to happen. It won't be too late to mention this matter when the time comes. Qi Yao smiled and said, that's true. When that person is forced to the point of no retreat by Daoist Zhang, he will definitely come and tell us the reason. Bai Wei said, actually, we might be able to do something. Qi Yao seemed to be interested and said, oh. Fellow Daoist, what are you planning to do? Bai Wei Yan said, those celestial beings do not know how to transform into a human. However, there is no spiritual vigor in this world, so they are not considered to have gone astray. However, their intelligence is still lacking, and it is hard for them to unleash their potential. If we can give them some pointers, it will not be difficult to raise their cultivation level, and we will be able to add some trouble to the human Tao. Qi Yao looked at him and said meaningfully, so Broad Victory Heavenly Lord is interested in these gods and monsters. Looks like he wants to preach in this world. Bai Wei bowed and said, as long as you respect my Tao, you will naturally be able to receive my teachings. Heng Jing said, if we only do this, will it make that person unhappy? Deng Zhang shook his head and said, this person possesses remarkable abilities. Since he called me here, then he must have already planned for this. If he comes out to obstruct us, then we can seize this opportunity to meet this person. Everyone nodded. Bai Wei took out a spell and began to chant. A moment later, a speck of light appeared out of thin air and disappeared into the depths of the endless void. He was, after all, a Taoist cultivator, and he was particular about fate. If the gods and monsters here were fated, they would be able to sense the incantation on his great spell, and they would be able to comprehend it and obtain all the divine arts. If the fated ones were to pass by, they would not even know. As such, this kind of spell might not seem suitable to be spread, but in reality, there were countless gods and monsters in the void, and there were also countless people who could obtain it. Qi Yao could naturally see the profoundness of this, but he let out a long sigh. Bai Wei asked curiously, fellow Taoist, why are you sighing? Qi Yao said, I am sighing. Fellow Taoist has already found your Tao, but I do not know where my Tao is. As an extraterritorial demon lord, he had yet to walk his own Tao path. Even if the future generations obtained the mystic stones, they would not be able to cultivate to his level. And if he did not understand the Tao path, he would not be able to find a path to improve. Bai Wei cupped his hands and said, the success of the Tao depends on one's cultivation. I've only just figured out where to go. Take that person called Half-Crossing for example. Compared to fellow Taoist, he's just a step ahead, so he might not be much better. Qi Yao thought for a while and said, speaking of which, that Taoist Zhang's Tao is now far above our generation. Do you think that this person can peek into that realm? When he said this, everyone was silent for a while. Deng Zhang said slowly, the upper realm is so difficult that I have never heard of it since ancient times. Among the many almighty beings I know, none have been able to cultivate such a Tao fruit. Transcending beyond the true Yang, no matter which era, almighty beings had been pursuing this Tao, but according to what he knew, no one had been able to achieve it. In the past, there were a few almighty beings whose whereabouts were unknown, and it was rumored that they had all seen the Tao of the upper realm, but that was only a rumor, and there was no way to prove it. Qi Yao asked again, then have you seen someone like Daoist Zhang? Deng Zhang paused for a while and said, never. He suspected that Zhang Yan might have stepped into the third level of the true yang, but similarly, even for this stage, he had never seen anyone prove it, so he could not get an answer. Qi Yao looked at the sky, and his gaze seemed to be cast into the infinite void. He said, I don't know why, but I have a feeling that the fight between Daoist Zhang and that person seems to be related to the upper realm. At this moment, Zhang Yan was sitting in Qinghuan Palace, and he also saw the sudden waves in the long river of Tianji, and there was some resistance in his arrangements. This was not because of the person behind him, but because of the few that escaped. After he calculated it clearly, he smiled faintly. These people obviously did not dare to stand out, so they only dared to do some small things. However, he did not care about this. The ancient gods and monsters were the first batch of gods and monsters born in the void when the 1K star stream was born. All the gods and monsters after that were more or less related to them, so they were the most valued by the person behind them. Because of this, the power of these gods and monsters was too great. If they were awake, there would be no place for the other gods and monsters in the world, so they had been in a deep sleep for a long time. Even if they were called out now, it was impossible for them to all wake up in one breath. It was already amazing if one or two of them appeared, and with the black tortoise there, it would not be difficult to deal with them. And he believed that after gradually facing the threat of the void being destroyed, even if Bai Wei and the others did not do these things, the person behind them would definitely wake them up one by one, so it did not cause much change to the general situation. However, since this person dared to make a move, he could not ignore it. He had to respond, in case he got an inch and wanted a foot, so he used his divine will to inform Dan Yi and the other two, and explained the matter. After Dan Yi heard it, he said, Fellow Taoist, do not worry, we will make the arrangements in a moment. After retreating from the divine will, he said, we were entrusted by fellow Taoist Zhang to watch over those outer Taoists. Since this person is interfering, I will also use my divine ability. Fu Qingming thought for a moment, and said, we cannot interfere with the 1K star stream, so how about this? This time the mountain and sea Taoists brought back many creatures called dragon demons, their potential is not small, we can use these creatures to make a fuss. Dan Yi and Michihito Ichido both agreed, and after the three of them discussed, they each used their divine ability, each took a chi activity, and threw it into the 1K star stream. About half a year later, the Taoist cultivators in the Luo Zhu and Ming Qing worlds had already been set up, and gradually stabilized. However, if they did not deal with the 1K star stream, it would not be safe. In order to lure him out, Wei Zihong took the suggestion from his subordinates, and several times, he made a move to attack the remaining worlds with great fanfare, and secretly set up an ambush. However, even after they attacked the target area, they did not see him. Because of this, he summoned Ao Shao and the others for another discussion. Everyone deduced that this person either did not dare to come, or his strength had been greatly damaged, exceeding their expectations, and he was still recuperating. Cheng Li said, for the past half a year, I have been observing the myriad heavens, and I discovered that any place where the descendants of deities and monsters live will definitely attract them. Previously, when I was observing the future with my fellow Taoists, I discovered that there were several hundred worlds that had not seen any deities and monsters before, but suddenly, there were quite a few deities and monsters roaming around. This could be the beginning of the rise of the heavenly domain, or it could also be that the remnants of the Rong sect are hiding among them. Sima Quan said, this will have to be verified one by one. Wei Zihong looked at Chiu Chong, and asked, Elder Chiu, have you done any divination? Chiu Chong replied, I have, but according to my divination, there does not seem to be this person's whereabouts in these worlds. Wei Zihong nodded. This person might be trying to conceal himself, but it was also possible that he really was not here. However, this was also normal. If this person knew that they were looking for him, he would definitely be trying to hide. It was very obvious that the deities and monsters were roaming around, so it was very likely that he would try to avoid them. He said, let's investigate first. Moreover, as long as this person is still around, he will definitely show himself. We can't let him drag us away. Otherwise, if this person doesn't show himself, will we just stand there and do nothing? For now, there's no need to worry too much about him. We just have to mind our own business. Although this person's existence prevented them from attacking everywhere, and they had to leave enough people behind to keep an eye on the rear, even if he did not want to come out, the myriad K-star flow would still push him out. Hence, they would meet again sooner or later. Shi Wanzong did not have the leisure to pay attention to the cultivators. At this moment, he was busy searching for ancient deities and monsters, and after killing them, he would steal their transformation abilities. For some reason, when he was in front of each deity and monster, he would immediately know their weaknesses. If this was in the past, it would have taken him a lot of effort to kill them, and it would have never been so smooth. However, it was as if his divine aperture was blocked by something. He never thought about the reason, even if it was the same for others. It was as if it was a matter of course. In the past, he might not even be able to find one deity, and it was even more difficult to take them down. But now, he had killed dozens of them in half a year, and it was obvious that his strength had recovered. On this day, he killed another deity and went back to serve Rotianzhong. Elder Ai found him and said, when the Tian sees the believers of the demonic deities roaming around, they might have already found our traces. Shi Wanzong said, then let's move to another place. The treasures in my storage can still survive in a place of wind and fire. Now that my vitality has not recovered, it's not suitable for me to meet the believers of the demonic deities. All of you can only be careful and avoid them if you can. There's no need to fight them head-on. At this point, he revealed a confident look. However, it won't be long before my cultivation is back. When that time comes, I will naturally find trouble with the believers of the demonic deities. Chapter 1867. Another year had passed. The realms that had been conquered by the Zenrins were all equipped with restrictive formations and were fortified internally and externally. In the beginning, in order to guard against Shi Wanzong, the Zenrins were still very cautious. Every time they invaded another realm, there would be at least one heavenly master following them. However, this person never showed up, so their actions gradually became bigger. In a pavilion somewhere in Jiutian Palace, Wei Zihong was sitting cross-legged and refining the purple clear spiritual vigor. During this period of time, he had been exhausted. Now that there was nothing to worry about, there were many things that he did not need to worry about. His subordinates could handle it, so he had more time to cultivate. At first, he thought that if he cultivated in this place where there was no spiritual vigor, his improvement would be limited. However, he soon realized that this was not the case. Because he could only borrow the purple clear spiritual vigor here, and there was no spiritual vigor around him, some places that he had neglected were reflected. After noticing these, he made up for them one by one, and his cultivation became much more profound. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly had a premonition. He sat up and looked outside. A moment later, a voice came from outside the pavilion. Shang Zhen, Heavenly Master Ao, Elder Qiu, and Heavenly Master Cheng have arrived at the palace. They seem to be looking for Shang Zhen. Wei Zihong replied, I understand. The god's eye in between his brows was always open when he cultivated. At this moment, it suddenly closed. Then, he shook his sleeves, got up, and walked out of the pavilion towards the main hall. Ao Xiao and the others were probably only avatars. However, it was not a small matter to alarm the three of them to come here. After a few steps, he stepped onto the transfer restrictive formation. In the next moment, he arrived at the main hall. He cupped his hands and said, Greetings to the three of you. Ao Xiao, Qing Li, and Qiu Chong also bowed. Wei Zihong invited the three of them to take a seat and asked, Since the three of you have come here together, there must be something important. Ao Xiao first said, Sect Leader Wei, Elder Qiu, and I have investigated dozens of realms and finally found a place that seems to be the hiding place of the wrong sect. Wei Zihong's spirits were slightly lifted. Even though everything was in order, he had never forgotten about Shi Wanzong. At this moment, he was a descendant of a deity who was comparable to a cultivator who had passed the third or fourth tribulation of enlightenment. If he left him alone, who knew what he would do? He asked, "Where is this place?" Ao Shao waved his sleeves, and one of the realms on the geomantic map in the hall shone brightly. This is the soft sky, an inconspicuous small realm. Because there are no sects or clans in this realm, not many people know about this place. Cheng Li replied, "During our investigation, we discovered that there were people in the Rong sect who had intentionally erased all traces of the existence of this realm. In reality, they were trying to cover up something that only made things more obvious. As such, we decided to focus on this realm first." Who would have thought that there would be so many bloodline descendants of gods and beasts entering and exiting this realm? Wei Zihong asked, "Have you found Shi Wanzhao's whereabouts?" At this time, Qiu Chong said, "According to Ai's calculations, even if this is the hiding place of the Rong school's remnants, Shi Wanzhong's whereabouts might not be exposed." Wei Zihong said with absolute certainty, "There must be someone here who knows where he is." He had seen a Rong sect elder following closely behind Shi Wanzhong that day. It was very likely that he knew where Shi Wanzhong was. Putting this aside, there was bound to be some form of communication between the two parties. Of course, the safest way was for Shi Wanzhong to not come into contact with the members of the Rong sect who had retreated. However, as a sect leader, if he did not appear in front of his disciples for a long period of time, not only would he lose his prestige, but he could also cause the hearts of his disciples to change. This was especially true when the sect was suffering a heavy blow. Therefore, there was no way that they would lose contact with each other. Ao Shao said, "This is also what I want to investigate next. As long as that place is indeed the hiding place of the Rong sect, as long as we can find the person who communicated with them and observe their past, it won't be difficult to track them down." Wei Zihong nodded and saluted them. He said, "Then I'll leave this matter to you." Ao Shao and the others returned the salute. After exchanging a few more words, they left on their own. Wei Zihong casually asked a disciple who was standing by the side, "Has there been any trouble recently?" The disciple hesitated for a moment and said, "Reporting to Shangzhen, there hasn't been any trouble recently. It's just that a few of the dragon demons in the palace have undergone some inexplicable changes, but we don't know the reason. As Shangzhen is in seclusion, we haven't had the time to report to him yet. The dragon demons that were brought here originally all had masters. However, a few Yuanying cultivators had died in battle recently. The dragon demons that they reared did not eat or drink, as if they wanted to sacrifice themselves for their masters. However, these few dragon demons had undergone frightening changes in the past few days. Their auras were getting stronger by the day. They were also worried about the actions of some monsters in this world, but because of this, they did not take action on their own. Instead, they kept a close eye on the situation. Wei Zihong knew that this world was very different from the void primordial sea and Busu heaven. Even the smallest changes could contain mysteries that no one knew about, so he was very vigilant about this. After asking about the location of the dragon demons, his aura changed and he appeared there. Then, he opened his divine eyes and looked at one of the dragon demons. However, at this moment, he felt his body shake. A few scenes appeared in his divine will. In an instant, he knew what had happened. He said, "I see. I didn't expect there to be such monsters in the void. Looks like I need to be more careful." With a thought, he returned to the hall and said to the disciple, "I already know about this. The changes in the dragon demons involve the exalted ones. You don't have to interfere. Just let them be." As long as a true yang cultivator was willing to use their vitality, they could create anything that was lower than themselves. It was just that in the myriad K-star stream, there was a powerful being above. If they directly used any means, or if the living beings exceeded a certain limit, they would likely be obstructed. As a result, the dragon demons could only slowly change. It would still take some time for them to become able to compete with the ancient monsters. In the depths of the void of the myriad K-star stream, there was a place that was close to chaos. Here, the sky was not the sky, and the earth was not the earth. Everything was formless and boundless. And in the midst of this chaos, there was an ancient monster that had not moved much since the beginning of the myriad K-star stream. and it seemed to be affected by some kind of external force, gradually waking up from its eternal slumber. Such a monster undoubtedly had the ability to manifest outside. Not only did it cause the place where it resided to shake and almost shatter, but it was also gradually coming into the world. In the void, countless monsters immediately felt that danger was about to descend. It was just that this pressure was almost everywhere, and they did not know where it came from. This caused them to become violent and agitated. Many of them rushed towards the land of the domain, trying in vain to find a place to rest and avoid the calamity. While many of the major sects were astonished, they were also overjoyed. In the past, in order to sacrifice to the Void Mother, they had to go through untold hardships to capture a large number of deities from the void. Now, the deities had delivered themselves to their doorsteps. However, as time went on, the endless stream of deities became too much for them to handle. They could only sacrifice a batch and deal with another batch. Even the large sects were like this, not to mention the small sections. Because they could not withstand the invasion of the monsters, they could only be forced to get close to the large sects in order to seek protection. Imperceptibly, there seemed to be a large hand pushing from behind. In the myriad K-star stream, many forces that used to be scattered around the star Luo star stream began to merge with each other. In just a night, the strength of many sects increased by several times. In the world that the cultivators occupied, they also faced such changes. They discovered that these young monsters kept crashing into the restrictive formation just to enter the land of the domain. It seemed like they were hiding from something. Wei Zihong thought that since these monsters had caused such a huge commotion, there was a high possibility that something big was about to happen. Perhaps it had something to do with the ancient monsters. Moreover, under such circumstances, it was not suitable for them to fight everywhere. Thus, he immediately ordered for the people that he had sent out to return in case of any accidents. In the east sky, Shi Wanzong woke up from his drowsy state. This time, he had successfully cultivated another kind of magical transformation. However, he felt a sense of unease in his heart. He had not seen Elder AI for a long time. Combined with this, it was very likely that something had happened to the Rong sect. When he thought of this, he did not dare to stay any longer. If the demonic god captured Elder AI, he would be able to find him, regardless of whether he was dead or alive. Thus, he leaped up and left this place without any hesitation. His figure quickly disappeared into the gloomy void. At the same time, Ao Xiao, Qing Li, and Qiu Chong appeared in this world. A few days ago, they had attacked the Yi Rose sky and discovered that it was indeed where the Rong sect was hiding. Elder AI knew that he could not resist them. In order to prevent Shi Wanzong from being found, he immediately burned his body with his blood essence and erased all traces of himself from this world. However, this was useless against Ao Xiao and the other two. Even if he were to be reduced to ashes, he would only be killed. It was impossible to completely erase the traces of his past existence. As long as he had a connection with Shi Wanzong, they would still be able to find what they were looking for. Thus, it did not take long for the three of them to arrive at this place. When Qiu Chong arrived, he felt an indescribable Weili force interfering with him. However, this in itself was enough to explain the situation. He made some calculations and said, even if the Lord isn't here, he should have been here before. Ao Xiao tried to peer into the past and the future. He seemed to vaguely see a familiar figure. However, at this moment, he felt his surroundings shake and everything around him shattered. It was as if he had been forcefully pushed out by some kind of power. This kind of situation would only occur when one encountered an almighty being on a similar level as himself. He said in a deep voice, "That's right. This person was here before, and just now, he left not long ago. It's a pity that we were a step too late." Qiu Chong said, "That might not be the case." Qing Li asked, "Did you discover something?" Qiu Chong also looked over. However, he was looking into the void. A moment later, a blurry and indistinguishable trace appeared in front of him. In just an instant, a large portion of his divine Wu Yuan Qi had been consumed. He was afraid that this person would escape, so he only took a brief moment to adjust his breathing before walking forward. He said, "Follow me, the two of you." Chapter 1868. Shi Wanzong had not escaped far when he felt a sense of uneasiness in his heart, as if something was about to happen. He was experienced enough to realize that danger was rapidly approaching. The most likely scenario was that the demonic god's followers had already found his whereabouts and were now chasing after him. Shi Wanzong was secretly shocked. He had not expected that he would be exposed so quickly. He could not help but start thinking about where to go next. Back in the Shiro world, he had already thought of a way out. However, this required him to erase his tracks. Otherwise, it would be useless if he was followed by others. Just as he was thinking about it, he saw a large shadow in front of him. He could not see what it was, so he immediately became vigilant. After a few glances, it was not difficult for him to tell that it was a demonic god. Although he had never seen it before, according to various records, he recognized that it was a demonic god. Its name was Hun. Logically speaking, such an existence should not exist here, but he had encountered it. This type of demonic god did not have a physical body, and it was unknown if it had its own intelligence. It often appeared in the void, and people who traveled in the void would occasionally bump into it. It was said that if one encountered danger, one could enter the belly of this demonic god and go to another world, thereby avoiding a calamity. As the sect leader of the Rong sect, he knew more than others. He understood that this demonic god was probably traveling between the real world and the illusory world. Those who used it to escape could only wait for the demonic god to move into the real world again to escape. However, no one knew how long that would be. If it only appeared again when the world ended, what use would it be? Even if it did not, it would be hard to know what the world would be like after hundreds of thousands of years. However, he thought about it again. If the people chasing after him were the same enemies he met last time, even though he had recovered some of his strength, it was not at its peak. He would definitely not be a match for these people. After escaping the last time, he realized that he had the help of the heavens. It was as if there was a Wali protecting him. Perhaps it was the same when he bumped into this demonic god. Perhaps he could use it to avoid a calamity. If it was in the past, he would definitely think about this choice again and again. However, at this moment, his mind seemed to be controlled by something. He did not think much and dove into the demonic god's belly. Soon after, the demonic god disappeared without a trace. Not long after, Ao Xiao and the other two arrived. Qiu Chong held the single-horned golden bull seal in his hand and kept trying to investigate, but he found that all the clues were cut off here. Ao Xiao also tried to look around, but he didn't see anything either. He sighed and said, "It seems like we've let him escape again." Cheng Li pondered for a moment before replying, "It looks like this person is blessed by luck, and it's very likely that there's a mighty figure behind him. In that case, it'll be very difficult to capture him. If they were to fight against someone of the same generation, no matter how they tried to escape, as long as their methods did not exceed common sense, they would always be able to find clues and flaws. However, if an upper realm almighty interfered, then no matter what they did, it would be useless." Qiu Chong looked ahead and said, "That might not be the case. Even if there is a powerful being interfering, there is definitely a limit to what he can do. Otherwise, we would not have been able to find him so easily." He tried to activate the single-horned golden bull seal. Previously, he had relied on this treasure to vaguely sense the other party's existence. If the connection was completely cut off here, then he wouldn't have thought too much about it. However, there was clearly a weak connection between this treasure and him. This meant that there was still a chance to capture him. However, he didn't know where the key to breaking through this trap lay. When Ao Xiao heard Qiu Chong's words, a guess formed in his heart. He said, "Perhaps this person is hiding in some region that's similar to a small world. However, this region is unique, and there's also the Wali interfering. That's why it's so difficult for me to find him." Qiu Chong slowly shook his head and said, "If that's the case, why didn't he use it earlier?" Cheng Li said, perhaps he's fused with some kind of supernatural power recently. At this point, he also realized where the problem lay. If Shi Wanzong had the ability to do so, he would have done it when he was serving Ro Tian. Why would he need to come all the way here? Chiu Chong looked ahead and said with certainty, he must have landed nearby. Fellow Taoists, please protect me while I try again. He immediately sat cross-legged in midair. Then, he took out the clear purple medicine and swallowed it to regulate his breathing. Since there were no external disturbances and he had sufficient external medicine, he recovered his transcendence energy not long after. Then, he stood up and looked ahead again. This time, his qi activity was at its peak. He wasn't as weak as he was just now. He could vaguely see the silhouette of a supernatural being floating there. However, it only lasted for an instant before it disappeared again. Even though it only lasted for an instant, it was enough to prove that the problem lay with this supernatural being. Chiu Chong came out of his meditation. His eyes lit up as he said, "It's here as expected." Ao Xiao and Cheng Li came and went. The former asked, "Fellow Taoist, did you discover something?" With a thought from Chiu Chong, the blurry silhouette of the supernatural being appeared before them. He said, "Fellow Taoists, please take a look." Ao Xiao's eyes shone brightly. After looking for a moment, he said, "From the illustrations of the natives, this supernatural being's name is Hun. It's rumored that it can swallow living beings into its stomach and forget about the laws of heaven and earth." He paused for a moment before he continued, "If that's the case, then Shi Wanzong might have hidden himself inside this creature's stomach." Even though they still didn't know how to force this supernatural being out, they knew where they should go now that they had found their target. Cheng Li said, "The records I've read don't have any way to deal with this supernatural being. We should send a letter to sect leader Wei and see if he can find a way to defeat it." After the three of them came to a decision, they took out their transmission talismans and used their fingers as a pen to write down the situation. On the other side, the talisman placed in front of Wei Zihong's hall suddenly moved. Then, lines of words appeared. After reading through them, he immediately understood the whole story. As this involved Shi Wanzong, he placed great importance on it. First, he ordered his disciples to search through all the records available. However, after searching through them, they couldn't find any records about this Hun, let alone a way to deal with it. Seeing that this method wasn't working, he sent someone to find Dragon Sovereign Qi Zhaolan and explained the situation to him. He asked, "Dragons are born together with the heavens, and you are the ruler of the dragon realm. Do you know the weakness of this supernatural being?" Qi Zhaolan pondered for a moment before he bowed apologetically. He said, "Among the supernatural beings in the void, there are thousands of them that are unknown to us. Only almighty beings can sense them, and there are hundreds of them that we can't smell or see. This Hun is among them, and it rarely appears in front of people. Our dragon realm knows of its abilities, but we really don't know how to find it." Wei Zihong asked, "Then, in this world, is there anyone who knows about it?" Qi Zhaolan said, "Our dragon realm has existed since the beginning of the world, and the records in our realm are the most detailed. If I don't know, then no one else will. It's really hard to find such a person in this world, but..." Wei Zihong looked at him stuttering and smiled. "If you have a way, you can tell me. Even if it involves some taboos, it doesn't matter. We are cultivators, and we pay attention to the heavenly Tao. We never speak of sinners." Qi Zhaolan heaved a sigh of relief. He bowed and said, "Then I will speak frankly." He straightened his body and carefully said, "I think that Shangzhen doesn't need to spend so much effort to find the weakness of this Hun. As long as it involves the living beings in this realm, others may not know, but the Void Mother will definitely know. Shangzhen has captured many descendants of supernatural beings, and we can ask those who have not submitted to us to offer sacrifices to her. We can also ask about this matter, and we will get the answer. If we offer enough sacrifices, we might even be able to force that Hun to come out." Wei Zihong didn't want to offer himself such an idea. He didn't mind using the Void Mother, but he had a question. He said, "The Void Mother is my enemy. How can I agree to something that is beneficial to me?" Qi Xiaolan bowed again and said, "The Void Mother is neither good nor evil. Offering living beings as sacrifices to ask for the truth of the Void Mother is a common rule since the creation of the world. If this path doesn't work, then the heavenly rites will collapse, and all living beings will lose their Tao. This is undoubtedly destroying its own foundation, so as long as there is a request in the sacrifice, it must respond." Wei Zihong immediately understood what he meant. The 1K star stream's method of asking for the truth of the Void Mother's sacrifice was a rule that all living beings agreed to. If the Void Mother dared to violate it, then everything built on this foundation would collapse, and no one would believe in the Void Mother anymore. Using the sacrificial method to ask for the weakness of the Hun, it could be said that it was using its own spear to attack its own shield. This was indeed a good idea. Of course, the prerequisite was that the person offering the sacrifice was a native of the 1K star stream. If it was a cultivator like them, they obviously wouldn't be able to do such a thing. However, this wasn't a problem. They could capture as many natives as they wanted. Some of them had submitted to them, and some were still unwilling to surrender. Previously, they didn't pay much attention to them, but now that they had to use them, they naturally had other methods. However, at this moment, he thought of another possibility and said, "If that's the case, can we use this method to reverse the 1K heavens?" Qi Xiaolan smiled bitterly and said, "Reporting to great truth, this method of asking for the truth has never been used before, so we might be able to find a loophole. However, if there's a next time, the Void Mother won't really reject us, but she can increase the number of sacrifices or use other methods to obstruct us. She won't let us get what we want so easily again." Wei Zihong nodded. He was just asking, and he didn't really expect it to work. He immediately handed over this matter, and under the proper arrangements of his disciples, most of the gods and monsters that they had captured this time were sacrificed. All the previous rules were followed according to the proper sacrificial method. Because this time, they weren't asking for supernatural powers, everything was relatively simple. After a month, they indeed obtained the answer that they had been searching for so long. Wei Zihong also sighed in his heart. This sacrificial method was so useful. If there was such a powerful existence in the void primordial sea or Bu Su heaven, perhaps many cultivation questions could be answered from him. After he personally looked through it, he recorded the results on the talisman. Ao Xiao and the other two had been waiting for news. When they saw the words on the talisman, they immediately understood what they should do. Chiu Chong said in a deep voice, "Later, I'll cast a spell to force him out. The two of you, please keep an eye on him. This time, we must kill him here. We can't let him escape." Chapter 1869. The method they had obtained from the Void Mother was actually quite simple. That hybrid monster had a yin and yang spirit. After it left the illusory world, the yang spirit that was in the real world would gradually fall into a deep slumber, while the yin spirit would awaken. Once this spirit became the dominant one, it would do everything in its power to prolong its existence. This was also the reason why this monster was rarely seen by others. Ao Xiao and the others also knew that as long as they could awaken the yang spirit of this monster, it would not be difficult for it to escape from the illusory world and return to the real world. Achieving this was not an easy task, but it was not exactly difficult either. As long as the person in the real world had a strong will and was sensed by this monster, they would have a chance to summon it. However, this monster had a special characteristic. It rarely moved from its original location. Hence, under normal circumstances, even if it was summoned, it would remain in the same place and not move from its original location. If the person who summoned it was not in the same place, they would naturally not be able to see this monster. When that thought disappeared, the monster retreated again. Therefore, the key here was to find the place where it had been hiding. Fortunately, the three of them had already determined the location. It seemed like the most difficult part had been resolved. However, if Chiu Chong had not insisted on checking, it was very likely that they would have missed it. Even a great cultivator who had overcome 4 tribulations was in such a state, let alone others. Hence, this method was not as useful as they had imagined. After Chiu Chong, Ao Xiao, and Cheng Li had come to a decision. He stood in the void and began to summon the monster with rapt attention. He did not know whether he could succeed in one go. To prevent the hybrid monster from escaping his senses after entering the illusory world, he was also constantly making calculations. After a long time, Ao Xiao and Cheng Li's expressions changed slightly. They'd already noticed that a strand of obscure vital energy was slowly appearing by their side. If nothing unexpected happened, then that bastard had probably received their summons and was about to flee into the outside world. At the same time, a blurry figure that was difficult to distinguish gradually appeared in the void. However, before it could completely appear, there was a sudden movement in the void. Streaks of starlight that resembled flowing flames shot toward them from the distance. Ao Xiao frowned and looked over with rapt attention. He noticed a large group of god fiends with sharp heads and thin tails, and their bodies were covered in fluorescent light. It seemed like they just happened to be passing by. Their group was enormous, and there were probably 1 trillion of them. If he didn't avoid them, then it wouldn't be long before he would bump into them. Cheng Li sneered. I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The Void Mother was restricted by the natural laws of this world. After being sacrificed and questioned, she had to give an accurate answer without any falsehood. However, this didn't mean that she wouldn't play any tricks afterwards. Wei Zihong had deliberately mentioned this point in his letter, telling the 3 of them to be on their guard, and they had also remembered it in their hearts. At this moment, these things could not have come earlier or later, but they just had to appear when they were about to lure the monster out, just now. They definitely did not believe that there was no one behind this. Ao Xiao said, "Leave it to me to handle this." He took out a dolua from his sleeve and split it slightly. 2 streaks of light, one gold and one black, appeared. Then, he raised his finger and flicked the black light. The light abruptly flew out and landed in the midst of the god fiends. In an instant, it was as if ink had been poured into water, and the god fiends were drowned in it. In just a few breaths' time, the god fiends were completely enveloped. He waved his hand again, and the black light flew back before returning to his sleeve. Even though he'd easily wiped out these monsters, he noticed that after this incident, the monster seemed to have been disturbed. It was originally on the verge of emerging, yet now it shrunk back, and he couldn't help but frown as he said, "Fellow Taoist Chiu, how is it?" Chiu Chong said in a low voice, "The god fiend's aura seemed to have alerted the god fiends, and they retreated again. Even though I tried to evade them, it was useless. It looks like we'll have to work harder." Cheng Li said, "This was our oversight. We should have made some arrangements to prevent the same thing from happening again." Ao Xiao nodded. In truth, they couldn't be blamed for their miscalculation. With their cultivation, all the god fiends had retreated when they traveled in the void. They had never bumped into one of them before. Just now, they had been on guard against any interference from the upper echelons. They hadn't expected so many god fiends to suddenly appear. Chiu Chong said, "It's fine. We've already figured out the crux of this place. A little disturbance isn't a big deal. We'll be able to lure these god fiends out." He knew that unless there was a powerful cultivator who could kill them right now, these little tricks wouldn't be able to stop them. This time, the 3 of them had released a few clones of magic power. Even if more god fiends came, they could deal with them from afar. They wouldn't be affected by the god fiends' attacks. Initially, they would have just needed to set up a formation here to deal with everything. However, they rejected this suggestion in the end. They were afraid that the god fiends would be on their guard and refuse to enter the real world again. After setting up the formation, Chiu Chong tried to summon them again. This time, it was much smoother than the previous time. After a short while, a blurry figure appeared again. During this process, there were no more disturbances from the outside. Not long after, the god fiend appeared in front of the 3 of them. It was a shapeless object that resembled a lump of thick mud. It was constantly twisting. Around it, there were wisps of silk-like mist that floated and surrounded it. After a few breaths, a ball of light bloomed from within. It looked like a door between 2 worlds. Then, a burly man slowly appeared from within. Shi Wanzong hid within the god fiend's body and fell into a half-dream state. He couldn't sense the changes in the outside world at all. He didn't know how long he had been inside. Suddenly, his bloodline stirred and he woke up. After a quick inspection, he knew that he had returned to the real world again. He couldn't help but be overjoyed. He wanted to check how much time had passed. However, when he turned his gaze, his expression changed. Chiu Chung didn't attack immediately. Instead, he bowed and said, "Sect leader Shi, it's been a long time." Shi Wanzong's expression darkened. He was puzzled and asked, "How did you find me?" Ao Shao didn't explain further. He said coldly, "What's the point of dwelling on this when you're already here? Today, I won't say anything unnecessary. I only ask if you're willing to surrender to me. If you're willing, you can avoid a calamity." Shi Wanzong's heart moved. He couldn't help but start planning. He knew very well that the Rong sect must have been annihilated if the other party could find him. In addition, the demonic god's followers were aggressive. Seeing the Wanke galaxy stream's forces being eradicated one by one, surrendering to them now was undoubtedly a wise choice. Most importantly, his life would be spared. However, when he thought of this, another thought popped up. What if these demonic god's followers were deceiving him and using him to attack other boundaries? What should he do if they found an excuse to send him to his death when they were almost done using him? Unknowingly, this thought gained the upper hand. In reality, if he was calmer and more rational, he could raise an objection here and request for both parties to sign a contract. If they really couldn't come to an agreement, then it wouldn't be too late to take action. However, he was currently being controlled by this obsession and didn't consider this at all. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that the other party was merely deceiving him. When he thought of this, a hint of hostility appeared in his eyes. Chiu Chung saw the sudden change in Shi Wanzong's expression and the murderous glint in his eyes. He shook his head and sighed. "You don't cultivate Tao techniques, your heart isn't pure, causing your divine orifices to be blocked and your mind to be clouded. You should be the one facing this calamity. No one can save you." He used his divine will to transmit a message. "My two friends, let's not talk too much with him. Let's just fight." Cheng Li's thoughts turned, and he focused his attention on Shi Wanzong. Immediately, multiple images of the future spread out from Shi Wanzong's body. After the latter had escaped the last time, to prevent him from using this move again, the three of them already had a way to deal with him. They just had to use their divine will and vital qi to calculate the future karma in which Shi Wanzong was about to escape. Then, they would find a way to cut it off and stop him. However, Shi Wanzong didn't have this ability at the moment. What he had done previously was to obtain a change from his hundreds and thousands of incarnations. Now, he only had a few dozen incarnations. Even if he used this method again, he would only be easily predicted by others. Thus, he didn't dare to use it at all. He raised his head and inhaled, drawing in a mouthful of dark void divine essence. His body instantly transformed into a streak of light, and he dashed out in an attempt to escape. However, at this moment, his body sank. He had actually been caught by an invisible force. He struggled for a moment, but when he saw that he couldn't escape, he let out a chuckle. His body instantly elongated, and he transformed into something that resembled a rhinoceros elephant. This was the god fiend, Enlightening. It had the ability to strengthen one's body. However, just now, he saw that a mirror had appeared above his head. A beam of light shone down from above and landed on his body. Then, his divine qi waned, and his skin turned gray. He actually looked like he was gradually aging. It was as if he had been transported back tens of thousands of years in an instant. He couldn't help but be shocked. Because he couldn't tell whether this was an illusion or reality, he hastily transformed again. This time, he turned around and saw a long-bearded crimson worm. This was the god fiend, Sting Poison. The speed at which he refined the dark void divine essence was dozens of times faster than the other god fiends. His defensive abilities were impressive. However, under the bombardment of magic power from Ao Shao and the other two, his body was instantly battered. Thus, he transformed again, but the moment he appeared, he was shattered again. If these divine ability transformations could be combined, perhaps Ao Shao and the other two wouldn't be able to do anything to him. However, he could only transform one at a time. This was too weak, and he couldn't deal with the three almighties at the same time. Regardless of whether it was his flight or his defense, there were obvious flaws in all of them. On the other hand, there was always one person observing the future transformations. Coupled with the divination of the divine will, they were always able to find the correct countermeasure. After Shi Wanzong performed all of his transformations once, he no longer had any tricks up his sleeve. He was firmly trapped where he was. When Ao Shao saw that the time was ripe, he flicked his hand and tossed out a crystal. A clear light flashed, and the crystal was sucked into the crystal. He smiled and said, "We've finally captured this fellow." Chiu Chong stroked his beard and said, "We seem to have missed something." Ao Shao pondered for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you talking about that guardian god fiend?" Chiu Chong nodded and said, "That's right. The Rong sect does have a guardian god fiend, and it was taken away by this fellow. However, it hasn't been released yet. I'm afraid that there might be trouble in the future." Cheng Li didn't seem to mind. He said, "This fellow has already been captured. When we return, we can naturally interrogate him." Chiu Chong thought about it and agreed with him. No matter what, they had to return and give Shi Wanzong an explanation after capturing him. Thus, they didn't dwell on this matter any longer. All of them used their divine abilities and teleported back to Jiutai Palace City. Chapter 1870. In Qinghuan Palace, Zhang Yan sat motionlessly, trying to figure out the various changes that occurred when the avatar consumed the Tai golden bead. These days, he had gained a lot of enlightenment. He thought that if he continued on this path, he would be able to understand the mysteries of creation before the end of this era. However, this method would only allow him to improve his control of Fa Li. It would not increase his cultivation. If he could not see the upper realm, he would not be able to change the heavens in the future. Back then, the human Tao was so powerful, but it was almost replaced by the Khanate demon after a drastic change. Fortunately, through Bushutian's Weili, he had a faint glimpse of an opportunity. This time, as long as he could steal the Weili from the person behind him, he could try to see the upper realm of cultivation. While he was meditating, he suddenly sensed something. He opened his eyes and saw that one of the hidden lines that his opponent had set up in the river of heavenly secrets had suddenly been cut off. The most crucial thing on this line was that Shi Wanzong. This cut meant that he was dead. Not only that, all the future clues that were related to him and derived from him had also disappeared without a trace. Therefore, when Shi Wanzong was captured, not only did the other side lose an important chess piece, but all the pieces that had been placed on it were also useless. At this moment, the increase and decrease of the qi of both sides immediately began to change. He watched as the destiny that represented the 1K starstream collapsed one by one. It only stopped when it reached a certain point. However, this was just an obstacle. His side continued to push forward unwaveringly. At this point, if the person behind him did not use the hidden lines, then there would be no more opportunities in the future. His eyes flickered slightly. It seemed that the outcome of this battle would soon be known. At this moment, in 1K star stream, Wei Zihong was overjoyed when he heard that Shi Wanzong had been captured. The only pity was that the Rong sect's monster was nowhere to be found. When he heard about this, he immediately found a few Rong sect elders to understand the situation. He was relieved. This kind of guardian monster could not be touched by people from other sections. Only the Rong sect's leader could control it. Therefore, with Shi Wanzong captured, there was no need to worry about the monster coming out to cause trouble. After confirming that there was nothing to worry about, he immediately let loose and ordered his subordinates to attack. In the myriad K all heavens, there were not many descendants of monsters like Shi Wanzong. Now that this person was gone and the constant heaven sect and the Rong sect were dead, no one would be able to stop them for the time being. Although the gathering of gods and monsters had caused many bloodline sects to become much stronger out of nowhere, the number of upper realm cultivators could not be filled in overnight. On the contrary, because the power of this generation had gathered, it was even more convenient for the cultivators to launch an attack. Of course, from the perspective of the 1K star stream, there were still many powerful monsters hiding in the depths of the void. They were the true mainstream in this world. These monsters of this generation of blood-descendant bloodlines. However, they had a flaw, and that was that their intelligence was inferior to that of blood descendants, so the possibility of them colluding with one another was very small. A single monster was not much of a threat to the cultivators. As long as it dared to show itself, they could destroy it immediately. In the past 2 years, almost 2/3 of the realms with sects had been seized by the cultivators. It looked like they would be able to take them down in one fell swoop if they just put in a little more effort. However, their momentum had slowed down. The reason for this was because as the cultivators invaded more and more domains, they were running out of manpower. In other words, they had already expanded to their current limits. Now, most of those who were charging at the forefront were the bloodline descendants of the gods and monsters who had sought refuge with them. Wei Zihong had also noticed this. He did not think that the 1K star stream had completely lost the ability to resist. He guessed that the other side still had some tricks up their sleeves and were just waiting for an opportunity. He was not the only one who could see this. Sima Quan, Peng Xiang, and the others had also made suggestions. Moreover, he had also noticed that many of the domains at the back were relatively empty. Even the restrictive formations were not complete. Therefore, after careful consideration and a discussion with Ao Xiao and the others, they finally decided to slow down their pace. They were prepared to take the last step after they had completely sorted out the situation at the back. On the other side, in order to resist the invasion of the demon gods' believers, the remaining sects of the 1K star stream had established another alliance. If one did not take into account the battle strength of the upper echelons and only looked at the number of blood-descendant clans participating in the alliance, they had already surpassed the Rong sect and the Constant Heaven sect. However, although the alliance conference appeared to be very powerful on the surface, everyone in the sects felt uneasy. They could see that the devil god's followers had already begun to invade the myriad heavens. Most people were pessimistic at the moment, feeling that the building was about to collapse. There was no longer any hope for the entire 1K star stream, and they were just struggling at death's door. There were even many people who were secretly preparing to join the demon gods' believers. A few sects even sent envoys to Jiutai Palace. They thought that even if they could not reach an agreement, they would at least have a way out in the future. However, all the sects who had done this quickly discovered that when they came down to offer sacrifices, the Void Mother suddenly asked for more sacrifices. This immediately made them panic. Within the 1K star stream, the lifelines of all the sects were tied to the sacrifices. As for a sect leader, even if they cultivated to the level of Yi Wujiu and Shi Wanzong, the various clans in the sect still needed the eternal fire to maintain their vitality. They needed the divine essence of the underworld to refine their bloodlines, and they needed to offer sacrifices to avoid disasters. If they could not do this in the future, then it was equivalent to losing the foundation of their existence in the world. Therefore, most of the sects immediately put away their thoughts and waited obediently. Before they saw an opportunity, they did not dare to make any moves. However, there was a portion of people who were hesitant. In their opinion, the 1K star stream was about to be destroyed. In that case, what was the point of stubbornly holding on to the sacrifices? When the demon gods' believers completely took over, even the Void Mother would not be able to protect herself. However, they also had the same concerns as Shi Wanzong. Would the demon gods' believers use them to attack the other sects? They had pledged their allegiance to the demon god to protect themselves. They were not willing to lose their lives because of this. Due to these various reasons, although they secretly sent envoys, they were still unwilling to make any substantial promises. The cultivators did not have much of a reaction to this. It was no longer the time when they had just entered the 1K star stream, so they did not care much about the blood descendants of the gods and monsters. If they were willing to attach themselves to them, they would not reject them. However, it was absolutely impossible to negotiate any conditions to protect the original interests of the sect. Luozhu Tian was originally the location of the Constant Heaven sect. Because this place was connected to the void, it was convenient to come and go. Thus, it had now become the main place for cultivators to stay. Even the Nine Heavens Palace city was suspended above this continent. At this moment, there was an altar in the main hall. More than 10 Duju cultivators, including Qiu Chong, surrounded it. Everyone sat upright and still, their expressions solemn. Just as Wei Zihong gave the order to stop, those with profound cultivation all felt a sense of danger descending, but they did not know where it came from, so they all worked together to calculate the situation. After a few months, there was finally a result. Qiu Chong stood up from his seat and bowed in front of Wei Zihong. Wei Zihong returned the bow and said, "Elder Qiu, how is it?" Qiu Chong replied, "My fellow Taoists and I have calculated that a great enemy is about to arrive in the void. Now, the only one with such ability in the Wanke star stream is that ancient god and monster. This time, it is very likely to land on the domain that we are currently occupying." Wei Zihong's expression froze and he sneered, "So this is what this junior is planning." The ancient god and monster entering the world would also cause great damage to the Wanke star stream. Wherever they passed, living beings would be destroyed and the domain would collapse. This was actually fighting for food with the heaven and earth. Now that more than half of the domain of the Wanke star stream was in their hands, if they came over, they would definitely collide with them. At this moment, he also seemed to understand why the other party did not make a move and did not make a move for so long was actually to make space for the god and monster to move, and other than that, they might have other tricks up their sleeves. However, at the same time, he also thought that the other party had used the ancient god and monster, which meant that they did not have many killer moves left to use. This battle was already coming to an end. As long as they could successfully pass this round, then this domain would be stabilized. He thought about it and said, "Is it possible to calculate where this monster has landed?" Qiu Chong pondered for a moment and said, "The arrival of such a monster can be traced, but now there is a group of Whaley people interfering and disturbing the heaven's secrets. It is also difficult for us to find the real reason, and we can only peek a little. It will be difficult for us to get an answer in the near future." Wei Zihong thought about it and said, "May I ask, Elder Qiu, can you calculate the cultivation level of this ancient god and monster?" Qiu Chong said, "If we only judge from its senses, this ancient god and monster is not very intelligent, but its strength is very strong. It is difficult to determine the number at the moment. If there is only one, then it will be fine, with the black tortoise venerable guarding it, there should be no need to worry. If there are two, then the other one will probably need me, Ao, and Qing to work together to stop it, if there are three." He shook his head, "Now that the heaven's secrets are unclear, we cannot make a conclusion, but we will do our best." Wei Zihong nodded, raised his hand and solemnly said, "Then I will leave it to you all." Qiu Chong bowed and returned to the altar and sat down. Wei Zihong, on the other hand, was deep in thought. This time, there were only two ancient god and monsters, so it should not be difficult to deal with the combined strength of everyone. But if the number exceeded this number, it would be a little troublesome. Although the possibility was not high, but they must consider the possibility, otherwise when the matter came to a head, it would be too late to deal with it. At this moment, he suddenly thought of the dragon demon, and called over a disciple who knew about it, and asked, "How are the dragon demon from a while ago?" Chapter 1871. After the disciple who knew about it was called over, he reported the situation of the demonic dragons truthfully. Wei Zihong's expression was slightly strange as he listened. His consciousness turned, and in an instant, he had already arrived at the hall where the demonic dragons were kept. As soon as he entered, he saw three burly Taoists in coarse robes sitting on the cattail hassock. Although they were just sitting, they were still more than a head taller than ordinary people. Their necks that were exposed were all covered with scales. When they saw him enter, they all stood up and bowed to him, saying, "Greetings, Sect Master Wei." Wei Zihong looked at the three of them and knew that they were the demonic dragons. However, They did not have any unusual qi dynamic on them, which was very strange. He returned the greeting and said, "Do the three of you have a name?" One of the Taoists who looked calm said, "We were enlightened by the Exalted One and gained spiritual wisdom. We all have a name. My name is Jia Ren." The person on the left said two words stiffly, "Yi Bin." The person on the right raised his chest and said casually, "My name is Bingchen." Jia Ren said, "We were enlightened by the Exalted One and borrowed a bit of innate divine light to shine into the beer, giving birth to a spirit and consciousness. Only then did we have our own views. The Exalted One once said that they wanted me to help the fellow Taoists in 1K Galaxy. After I succeed, I can get rid of this body and reincarnate. In my next life, I can enter Tao and cultivate again. Therefore, if Sect Master Wei needs anything, just let me know." Wei Zihong instantly came to an understanding in his heart. A demonic dragon was created after birth, and it didn't possess a soul. Even though its combat ability wasn't weak, it was fundamentally inferior to an ordinary living being. It was born with many deficiencies, so it was unable to cultivate divine abilities, let alone ascend the path of the Tao. This time, he'd borrowed the help of a few great experts to temporarily make up for this flaw. Then, once he died, he could shed his old skin and enter the world of mortals, and he would have that trace of fortune to seek the grand Tao. It was just that he could not tell the background of the three of them, unless he used the divine eye on his forehead to observe. But since they were of the same path, there was no need to do so. He directly asked, "May I know how your cultivation level is?" Jia Ren said, "If we go out now and revert to our original forms, we should be able to spar with Heaven Lord Ao and the others." Wei Zihong nodded. He could tell that this person was still holding back. After all, the three of them had been personally taught by a true Yang Almighty Being. Perhaps their actual combat abilities were even more than that. Even if they were only on par with Ao Xiao, Qing Li, and the others, they could still fight against the ancient gods and monsters if they joined forces. He asked a few more questions and gained a rough understanding of his abilities. As long as the three of them transformed back into their demon dragon forms, their whaley body would be comparable to that of a grand cultivator who had gone through 4 or 5 tribulations. However, there was also a flaw in this. This was because their abilities were not naturally cultivated, but were bestowed by a mighty being. Therefore, they could not sustain it on their own, nor could they use external objects to make up for it. Hence, their mana and chi activity would constantly decline. It would be fine if they did not move, but once they fought with others, the decline would accelerate. In reality, it was not only them. The ancient gods and monsters were the same. Because they were blessed by a mighty being, they would have to face the same predicament as well. As long as they entered the real world, they would have to face the same predicament, which was why they would constantly fight for the divine essence of the underworld. However, because the ancient gods and monsters were born with unpredictable supernatural powers, if both sides were bestowed with equivalent whaley, the demon dragon was obviously inferior. Fortunately, they could make up for it with quantity. Dan Yi and the others had entrusted their whaley to the ancient gods and monsters. It was not that they could not bestow more whaley on the ancient gods and monsters, but if they did, they would run into the limits of the person behind them and might be wiped out. On the other hand, it was the same for Deng Zhang. If Zhang Yan sensed that the ancient gods and monsters had crossed the limits of his qi activity, he would rather draw out a portion of his strength to fight against the ancient gods and monsters and kill them first. When Wei Zihong came out of the hall, he had some confidence in dealing with the invasion of the ancient gods and monsters. Moreover, he believed that because these monsters were also part of the 1K stellar stream and occupied an extremely important node, if he could exterminate them, he would not have to bother about the other domains that he had yet to conquer, and he would be able to seize the power of the heavenly secrets. When he thought of this, he could not help but attach more importance to this matter. When he returned to the hall, he invited Ao Xiao, Qiu Chong, and Chen Li over to discuss further. Then, he ordered all the disciples outside to retreat to the various main domains, leaving the less important domains to themselves. Moreover, those domains were not completely unguarded. There were also restrictive formations guarding them, so even if the descendants of the ancient gods and monsters came to invade again, it would not be easy to take them down. Even if they were really conquered, they could retake them later on. After another 40 days, Qiu Chong came over and said, "Sect leader Wei, according to our calculations, the ancient gods and monsters should arrive in these 2 days." Wei Zihong's expression was solemn as he asked, "Can you be sure?" Qiu Chong replied, "Unless we retreat now, there will not be any deviation. It is very likely that it has landed outside Luozhu's sky, but it is still difficult to determine the number at the moment." Wei Zihong pondered for a moment, then he raised his head and said, "It is not coming here alone, otherwise it would not have landed in Luozhu's sky and fought us head-on. This is most likely just to hold us back. There should be other ancient gods and monsters in other places." Qiu Chong nodded slowly and said, "My fellow Taoists Ao, Cheng, and I also have the same deduction." Wei Zihong paced back and forth a few steps, thinking for a moment, then he made a decision. He raised his hand and bowed, saying, "We will have to defend Luozhu's sky. I will have to trouble the 3 of you to guard it." Qiu Chong returned the bow with a solemn expression and said, "We will ensure that this place is not lost." Wei Zihong then ordered someone to invite Jia Ren and the other 2 dragon demons over, and said, "The ancient gods and monsters are about to arrive, so I will have to leave Luozhu's sky to the 3 of you." The reason for this was that it was impossible for the ancient gods and monsters to work together. At most, there would be 1 ancient god and monsters coming to Luozhu's sky. If there were more, they would definitely go somewhere else. Wei Zihong's main purpose this time was to protect the domain that he had conquered, so it was best to split up to deal with the enemy. Jia Ren said calmly, "Sect leader Wei, don't worry, even if we have to die, we will ensure that this domain is not lost." Yi Bin and Bing Chen also responded with a calm expression. Although they had just gained intelligence just now, but perhaps it was because they knew that their time in this world was short, they had an unruly temperament. Wei Zihong knew that after this, regardless of success or failure, the 3 of them would be reincarnated, so he bowed solemnly again. After the 3 of them left, he waved his sleeves and drove the palace away from Luozhu's sky, heading towards the endless void. 2 days passed quickly, and in the void, a boundless shadow was reflected. It did not have any specific form, but people could clearly see it. At the moment it arrived, it began to frantically plunder the divine essence of the underworld space. The descendants of the ancient gods and monsters that stayed on the land gradually lost their vitality, then turned into dried corpses, as if their original essence had been sucked out. Wei Zihong was in the palace and immediately sensed that there were only 2 ancient gods and monsters that had returned. One of them landed in Luozhu's sky, and the other in Wuqing's sky. He was slightly relieved. The arrival of the ancient gods and monsters did not happen overnight. Even if they came again, it would be a few years later. If this was the case, he could go to Luozhu's sky to ask the Black Tortoise Venerable to kill one of the ancient gods, and then the 3 of them would join forces to kill the last one. However, he felt that the other party had more tricks up their sleeves, but he could not guess what other tricks they would have, so he could only deal with what was in front of him. At this moment, in the 5 heavens, Deng Zhang and the others were also watching the scene. When they saw the ancient gods and monsters that they had pushed to leap into the world, they were all expressionless because they did not think that the attack would succeed. By Wei's side, Priest Zhang has come this far, I'm afraid we can no longer stop him. Deng Zhang said in a low voice, then it depends on how that person arranges. None of you will forget the future phenomenon. Everyone nodded. Regardless of whether they believed it or not, this was their only hope to fight against the people of humanity. However, at this moment, the 5 of them sensed something at the same time. They all looked in a certain direction and saw that somewhere in the void, an ancient gods and monsters that were hibernating there had suddenly disappeared. They did not know where it had gone. It was just the movement of a god and monsters, so they definitely would not have sensed it. There must be something behind it, so they all began to calculate. Deng Zhang's cultivation was the most profound. After calculating a few times, he understood the other party's intentions. He nodded and said, I see. Bai Wei shook his head repeatedly and said, so what we did before was all within that person's expectations, and it just so happened that he used me to conceal the heaven's secrets. Qi Yao sneered and said, what a good plan. Heng Jing also did not expect that person's goal to be this. His divine will transmitted, Demon Lord Qi Yao, will such a plan really work? Qi Yao snorted and said, that's not necessarily true. Although the person behind this is powerful and has an unknown background, it is not easy to deal with him now that we have provoked him. If we are not careful, we might end up making a fool of ourselves. In the void primordial sea, in front of the barrier between the two worlds, Zhang Yan's body of strength suddenly opened his eyes. Just now, he suddenly realized that there was an additional god and monster that was originally in the 1K star stream in the anti-heaven and earth. With his current cultivation, he did not need to calculate. He only needed to look at the river of heaven's secrets to instantly understand the cause and effect. He raised his eyebrows. No wonder the person behind this wanted Qi Yao and the others to also go to the 1K star stream. It was because of this cause and effect connection that the god and monster could be sent to the anti-heaven and earth. The real intention here was to provoke a fight between the people of humanity and him, the demon lord Qi Zhou. An ancient god and monster like this that was born at the beginning of the 1K star stream could truly be entrusted to the mighty Weili. Even the person behind this could use this monster to create another heaven outside and transfer the Weili that was stolen from Busu Tian over, thus causing all of his previous efforts to be in vain. Under normal circumstances, he could not do this because no matter where this god and monster was moved to, it would be killed by him or Dan Yi. However, if it was moved to the anti-heaven and earth, then it would be different. Because to that person, if it was not through the demon Lord Qi Zhou who was guarding the barrier between the two worlds, then no one could do anything to this god and monster. Next, the people of humanity would definitely go to the door and ask for the door to be opened. If they did not get what they wanted, they would definitely choose to start a war. In this way, their goal would be achieved. Zhang Yan sneered. Unfortunately, the demon Lord Qi Zhou and his main body were one person and two people were one. Therefore, this situation could be easily resolved. He immediately moved his consciousness and the ancient god and monster turned into nothingness as if it had never appeared. At the same time, his main body sent a message to Dan Yi and the others. He said that he had a way to solve the problem of the god and that they did not need to worry about it,